The year is 1273. During morning mass, a monk hears the voice of Christ. "You describe me well. What kind of reward do you want?" His answer shocked everyone. "Nothing but you, Lord." After that, he didn't write another line. But until that moment, Thomas Aquinas had accomplished the impossible, united the warring worlds of faith and reason. He was abducted by his family, he was condemned by the church, his ideas were banned as heresy. But today his philosophy is the foundation of Western civilization. What did he discover that changed the history of mankind? We'll figure it out right now. Part 1. The Revolutionary Blend. Thomas was born in 1225 in Sicily at the Roccasecca Castle near Aquino. Coming from a noble family connected to both the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of France, he seemed set for a prominent church career. When he was just 5, his family sent him to the Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino, aiming for him to eventually become its wealthy, powerful abbot. But Thomas had other ideas. The 13th century was buzzing with intellectual excitement. Universities were just starting in places like Paris, Bologna, and Oxford. Much of Western philosophy had been lost for ages, including the works of Aristotle, the top philosopher of ancient times, which had mostly vanished from Latin Europe. Only scraps survived, left behind by Roman writers like Boethius and Cicero. Yet in the 12th and 13th centuries, these texts made a comeback in Europe through a surprising path. The Islamic world, Muslim scholars had kept, translated, and delved deeply into Aristotle's ideas. Thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes developed sophisticated systems blending Aristotelian thought with Islamic beliefs. When translated into Latin, these works gave European scholars a full philosophical system, addressing everything from logic to biology, with unmatched depth and insight. This change was both groundbreaking and alarming. The challenge was, Aristotle had been a pagan, unfamiliar with Christianity, revelation, or Christ. Yet his philosophy powerfully explained the natural world, making it hard to ignore. Some ideas even clashed with Christian teachings. He suggested the world might be eternal, personal immortality wasn't real, and God might not care about individuals. Traditional theologians viewed Aristotle as a threat to pure Christian faith. In 1277, right after Aquinas' death, the Bishop of Paris banned 219 propositions linked to Aristotle or Aquinas' works. Into this turbulent scene came the young Thomas. Defying his family, he joined the Dominican order, a new, debated group of preaching and studying friars. His furious family had his brothers kidnap and imprison him for over a year, trying to change his mind. One tale claims they sent a prostitute to tempt him away from celibacy, but Thomas famously drove her off with a burning log, traced a cross on the wall and fell asleep praying. He was unshakable. Once free, Thomas headed to Paris to learn under Albert the Great, an early Aristotle scholar. Albert believed Aristotle's work was too impactful to ignore or dismiss. It needed to be understood, corrected when needed, and merged with Christian truths. Thomas took this idea further than anyone else. He didn't just want to Christianize Aristotle. He aimed to use Aristotelian methods to create a new synthesis. Aquinas' main belief was that truth is unified. Anything truly found by reason and anything truly revealed by God cannot contradict, because both originate from the same divine mind. Faith and reason are both routes to truth, and while revelation goes beyond what reason alone can achieve, reason is good, reliable and necessary. Aquinas' stance was daring. In a time of rising tension between philosophy and theology, he carefully specified what reason alone can uncover versus what requires revelation. Arguing some truths about God can be philosophically proven, that God exists, is one, eternal, unchanging, and the cause of everything else. These ideas are open to anyone who's willing to think through the evidence in nature, whether they're Christian or not. But some truths can't be grasped by logic alone, like the concept of God as a Trinity, or God coming to earth as Christ, or people being resurrected. These need to be revealed because they are based on God's choices in history. This distinction was key. It suggested that philosophy had its own space where natural reason could explore reality, ethical principles, and the human soul without always referencing the Bible or church for guidance. Aquinas wasn't someone who thought faith was the only thing that mattered. He believed reason could truly uncover truths about existence's core questions. However, Aquinas didn't think reason alone was enough. He argued that human reasoning was flawed by sin and limited by our own nature. We make errors, have biases, and get sidetracked by our emotions and selfishness. Revelation is there to correct and guide, showing us truths we might be able to discover on our own, but helping us get there more reliably and thoroughly. Plus, Revelation teaches us things we could never find out on our own about God's essence and God's plans for saving humanity. To pull this all together, Aquinas had to master a wide range of subjects. He read pretty much all of Aristotle's major works, like physics, metaphysics, Nicomachean ethics, politics, posterior analytics, and on the soul, among others. He dove into Augustine's work, a significant figure in Western Christian theology. He explored writings by the Greek and Latin church fathers and studied Jewish and Muslim philosophers like Maimonides, Avicenna, and Averroes. He also absorbed ideas from the Stoics and Neoplatonists, all while teaching, preaching, travelling, debating theology, and serving his Dominican order. The result of his hard work was an incredible collection of writings crafted in less than 2 decades. His top achievement was the Summa Theologica, or Summary of Theology, which he began around 1266. The title sounds modest, almost humble. Aquinas called it a beginner's guide to theology. Yet the work is an enormous feat. Over 2.5 million words in Latin, split into 3 main sections, with hundreds of questions and thousands of articles. It's thorough, organised and meticulously logical. The Summa's layout showcases Aquinas' grand vision. Part 1 dives into God, existence, nature, how God knows and chooses, God's creation process and the nature of angels and humans. Part 2 tackles ethics, the ultimate goal of life, moral actions, virtues and vices, law and grace and specific virtues and their opposite vices. Part 3 focuses on Christ, the incarnation, Christ's life, and the sacraments as channels of grace to believers. Aquinas never completed the work. He stopped writing in December 1273, leaving the end unfinished. A supplement compiled from earlier writings filled some gaps, but the Summa is still a grand, yet incomplete, work. What set Aquinas apart wasn't just his use of Aristotle. Others had done that. What made his work groundbreaking was how rigorously and systematically he combined ideas. He didn't just go along with Aristotle's conclusions. He applied Aristotle's methods, defining terms carefully, using logical arguments, making clear distinctions, examining challenges, and following arguments wherever they led. And he modified Aristotle's views where needed, arguing that the world was created and not eternal, that God knows specifics, not just universal concepts, and that human souls are immortal. The technique he employed is known as scholasticism, which follows a clear pattern. Each question in the Summa starts with objections against the position Aquinas plans to defend. Then there's a brief authoritative statement, often from scripture or a church father, guiding towards the right answer. Aquinas' detailed and often complex response follows, aiming to tackle the question thoroughly. Finally, he tackles every initial objection one by one, explaining why they're flawed or how they fit into his viewpoint. This way, a thinker faces the strongest counter-arguments before standing up for their belief, which encourages both humble and careful thinking. Yet for Aquinas, scholasticism was more than a technique. It was how he saw knowledge. He thought reality could be understood. To him, the world wasn't a jumbled mess or a mirage. It had an orderly pattern the human mind could comprehend. At the time, this wasn't a given. Some theologians stressed God's unrestricted freedom and power so much that they made creation look random, based on divine will, not reason. Aquinas disagreed. He argued that God creates with reason, holding eternal principles within the divine mind, which reflect in the world's structure. This belief made science possible, suggesting that studying nature equaled exploring God's work and the rational order placed within everything. This viewpoint clarifies how Aquinas could be both a thoughtful philosopher and a devoted Christian, seeing no conflict. Using reason correctly was seen as honouring God, who bestowed reason. Exploring nature was akin to reading a creation book authored by God. Philosophy wasn't an adversary of theology, but rather a helper, providing tools to understand and defend revealed truth. Yet theology wasn't opposed to philosophy but completed it, pointing reason to truths it couldn't find alone. But Aquinas wasn't blind to reason's limits. He acknowledged that most people don't think philosophically, that philosophical arguments are hard, need time and can be wrong, and that even geniuses disagree. Thus he saw revelation not just as helpful but essential. Without it, humanity would flounder in confusion over crucial matters, with many never discovering or realizing moral truth too late, or mixing it with mistakes. Divine revelation, shared through scripture and upheld by the Church, offers guidance available to everyone, not just philosophy scholars. This dual belief in reason and revelation fit Aquinas well in his historic era. He stood between extremes: the radical Aristotelians, followers of Averroes, who appeared to prioritize philosophy over faith, claiming philosophy could find truths contradicting revelation but still true, and the conservative theologians who wanted to discard Aristotle entirely, protecting faith by keeping it separate from her philosophy. Aquinas turned down both sides. Against the radicals, he held that genuine truth couldn't conflict with revelation. Against the conservatives, he maintained that reason was reliable and that Aristotle's insights could blend with Christian beliefs. Because of this, both camps viewed him with suspicion. Just 3 years posthumously, the 1277 condemnation targeted ideas that seemed like his. The Franciscan order, with its own theological roots in Augustine and Bonaventure, viewed him skeptically. But his own Dominican order defended his thoughts, and eventually his influence grew. By the 14th century, his work became a standard in theological circles. By the 16th century, his Summa was placed beside Scripture during the Council of Trent, and in 1879, Pope Leo XIV declared Thomism, the Catholic Church's official philosophy, reigniting interest in his ideas that persisted well into the 20th century. But Aquinas' impact stretched beyond Catholic theology, influencing Western law and political thought through his natural law theory, impacting moral philosophy with his virtue ethics, and presenting a unique metaphysical stance as an alternative to Platonism and modern materialism. His precise distinctions and careful argumentation set a benchmark for philosophical inquiry. Even those who disagreed with his conclusions often adopted his methods, showing that deep questions could be tackled with clarity and integrity. Grasping Aquinas means seeing philosophy and theology as intertwined in a shared quest for truth. It's realizing that reason and faith are partners, not enemies. It means viewing the natural world as infused with purpose and meaning, rather than just random matter. Moreover, it involves understanding people not as isolated individuals or mere social products, but as rational beings with inherent purposes. The upcoming chapters dive into the core elements of Aquinas' thought: his views on existence, his proofs of God, his natural law ethics, his virtue ethics, his political theories, and his concepts of human nature and the soul. We'll examine where he succeeds and where he falls short, appreciate his sharp insights, and question his debatable points. And we'll uncover why, even after more than 750 years, philosophers are still debating whether Thomas Aquinas truly nailed it. Part 2. The Metaphysics of Being. At the core of Aquinas' whole philosophical system is a groundbreaking idea about existence. It's such a game changer, so different from how most people think, that getting it means turning your thinking upside down. Yet once you understand it, it sheds light on everything in his philosophy, his proofs for God's existence, his ethics, his view on human nature, and his political views. Everything springs from this metaphysical base. The big idea is this: in every being except God, there's a real split between what a thing is and the fact that it exists, between essence and existence, between the nature of something and the fact that it's even there at all. Sure, it sounds kind of abstract, maybe even simple, but it's not. It's the key to unlocking Aquinas' entire worldview. Let's break it down with something concrete. Take a horse, for instance. What makes a horse a horse? Its essence, its nature, what it's all about. A horse has 4 legs, a mane, hooves, it can run, it's got a specific digestive system, and instincts for grazing and living in herds. All these traits make up what it is to be a horse, the essence of horseness. Now here's another question. Why does this specific horse exist? Why is there this horse instead of nothing? For most philosophers before Aquinas, this second question seemed kind of pointless or mixed up. Of course, things exist. What more is there to say? Existence was just another property, like being brown or being fast. But Aquinas saw it differently. He realized that existence isn't just another item on a checklist of properties. Existence is what makes all those properties become real, rather than just possible. It's the basic reality that lets anything be real at all. To get this, Aquinas leaned on ideas from Aristotle, but gave them a whole new twist. Aristotle had a concept of potentiality and actuality. A seed can become a tree but is actually a seed right now. A piece of marble could become a statue but is currently just marble. Potentiality is having the capacity to become something. Actuality is being that something. This explained change, since things change by turning their potentials into reality. Aquinas took this idea further. He said that in every created being, essence is like potentiality, waiting for existence to make it real. Without existence, essence is nothing. It's less than a possibility. Existence is the act that turns essence into reality, taking it from nothing to being. This concept is nuanced. We're not suggesting that essences exist somewhere in a Platonic realm waiting to become real. We're not saying essence and existence are separate things glued together. Instead, they're 2 metaphysical principles inside every created being. You can't separate them, but they're 2 different sides of what it means for something finite to exist. Think of them as complementary parts that make something a whole, existing thing. Why is this important? Because it shows how everything except God is radically contingent. Consider our horse again. Its essence doesn't include existence. We can totally understand what a horse is without knowing if any horses even exist. We can define it, analyze its properties, grasp its nature, all without saying anything about whether horses really exist. Essence doesn't care about existence. This means the horse needs something outside itself to exist. Its existence isn't necessary, self-explanatory, or grounded in its own nature. This applies to everything finite. Your existence, my existence, the stars, atoms, mountains, ideas. None of these exist just because of what they are. Their essence doesn't make them exist. They could not exist, and there wouldn't be a problem. A world without horses or without you or me is completely logical. Our existence is thus borrowed, caused by, and depends on something else that can give existence. But think about what this implies. If in created things existence is separate from essence, and existence is something received rather than naturally owned, then something must give them existence. Something must be the cause of the existence of entities whose essence doesn't inherently include existence. And this something can't be a mix of essence and existence, because it would require a cause too. Therefore, there must be at least one being where essence and existence are the same. A being that exists simply because of what it is, a being whose very nature is to exist. This is how Aquinas arrives at the concept of God. This isn't through the famous 5 ways yet, but straight through metaphysical analysis. If the essence-existence separation is real and it defines everything finite, then logically, there's something infinite where essence and existence are unified. This being wouldn't get existence from another. It wouldn't rely on anything for its being. It would exist necessarily, eternally, and unchangeably. It would be pure actuality without any potentiality, because any potentiality would imply it could be more than it is, indicating it received existence instead of being existence itself. Aquinas names this being, whose essence is existence, as pure being, or ipsum esse subsistens in Latin. It's not just another being among others, but being itself. Not just one more existing thing, but the foundation and source of all existence. This is God in Aquinas' view, not the largest entity in the universe, but the reason why anything exists at all, the act that brings every essence into existence, the eternal source of all finite existence. But let's dive deeper, since critics have brought up strong objections. First, how do we know essence and existence are truly distinct? Aquinas points out that we can grasp what something is without knowing if it exists. We can define a dragon in detail, even though dragons aren't real. We can understand what a million-sided shape is without imagining it, or seeing if any physical object fits that shape precisely. This indicates essence and existence are conceptually different. But does this conceptual difference prove a real distinction? Not necessarily. Just because I can separate essence from existence in thought doesn't mean they're genuinely separate principles in reality. I can think about a ball's colour independently of its shape, yet colour and shape aren't truly separate metaphysical principles. They're just different aspects I can mentally focus on. So maybe the essence and existence distinction is merely a mental construct, a way we choose to think about things, not a trait of reality itself. Aquinas foresaw this objection. He argues if essence and existence were only conceptually different, then fully understanding a thing's essence would reveal its existence. Understanding what a horse is would then tell us if horses exist. However, this is clearly not the case. One can be an expert in horse biology, knowing their nature and essence fully, yet not know if any horses actually exist. A biologist might study extinct species, understanding their essence clearly, even though those species don't exist. This demonstrates that existence is something real, added to essence, not contained in or derivable from the essence itself. Moreover, Aquinas explains, if essence and existence weren't really distinct, then everything would necessarily exist. If a thing's nature included its existence, understanding that nature would show the thing must exist. But it's evident most things don't exist necessarily. Horses are contingent. They emerged at a certain point in evolutionary history and could vanish. Their existence relies on previous causes, evolution, proper environmental conditions, ongoing reproduction. None of this makes sense if their essence includes existence. Critics, however, push the debate further. Even if we accept that created things have essence and existence as separate principles, why assume there must be something in which they are identical? Why not claim existence is always separate from essence? Everything is contingent, and no necessary being exists. Perhaps the universe itself is just a brute fact, contingent all the way without ultimate explanation. Aquinas would argue that this contradicts a core principle. An infinite regress of dependent beings isn't possible. If everything depends on something else for its existence, and this chain goes on endlessly, then logically, nothing would exist at all. Imagine a never-ending line of dominoes, each falling only because the one before it did. Without an initial domino that topples by itself, none would fall. In the same way, without a being that exists independently and necessarily, nothing would come into existence. But is this reasoning solid? Thinkers like David Hume and Bertrand Russell challenged it. Hume suggested that explaining each part of a series might be enough. If I can trace a horse's existence back to its parents, and further back to their ancestors, haven't I provided all necessary explanations? Why seek a reason for the whole chain beyond the reasons for each link? Aquinas would argue that this reasoning misses the crucial point. We're not just asking why this specific horse is here instead of another. The real question is why there are horses, or anything at all, instead of nothing. Why does existence manifest in essences, rather than essences remaining mere possibilities or not existing at all? Explaining the sequence of horses clarifies how existence spreads among them, but not why existence itself is present. That requires a source of existence, something that is not given existence, but is existence itself. But even if we assume this, why should such a source exist? Maybe existence is just an inexplicable fact. The universe and all within it might just be, without needing a further cause. This idea isn't logically contradictory. It's possible for contingent things to exist without a necessary cause. So how does Aquinas justify moving from finite being's contingency to an infinite being's necessity? We then approach what might be known as the principle of sufficient reason, though Aquinas didn't state it in these exact words. The concept is that everything has an explanation for its existence, either within itself or through something external. If something's nature doesn't inherently include existence, then something external must explain why it exists. This feels inherently sensible, as we naturally seek explanations. Scientific inquiry assumes that all natural events have causes and reasons. Our rational mindset doesn't accept things just happening for no reason. But is this principle genuinely true? Or could it be a psychological habit we impose on reality? Look at quantum mechanics, revealing subatomic events that seem random and uncaused, defying deterministic ideas. Does this challenge the principle of sufficient reason? Not necessarily. Aquinas didn't focus on the causation of events in particular times, but rather on the existence of things at all. These are different concerns. Even if quantum events lack prior causes, they involve existing elements like particles and energy. The question stays, why do these things exist at all? Let's explore another key idea in Aquinas' metaphysics, the difference between substance and accident. This comes from Aristotle, but Aquinas refined it. A substance is an independent entity, existing on its own. Accidents, on the other hand, are properties that exist only within substances and can't exist independently. My height, colour, and temperature are examples of accidents. They modify me, the substance. Why is this important? Because it illustrates that not everything exists in the same manner. Substances are primary beings and the core subjects of existence. Accidents exist derivatively, merely as attributes of substances. When we talk about a colour existing, we mean in something. And when we talk about a substance existing, we mean it stands alone. This distinction aids Aquinas in explaining how change occurs while preserving identity. If I grow taller, my height alters, but I remain the same person. The accident changes while the substance stays constant. If we couldn't tell the difference between what makes something what it is and its changeable qualities, every little change would wipe out the thing and create something brand new. Obviously, that's not how it goes. Things manage to stay the same even when they change. I'm still the same person I was 10 years back, even though so many things about me have shifted. In Aquinas' view, substances are also complex. Material things, according to him, are made of matter and form. Matter is the stable part that doesn't disappear when the form changes. Form is what shapes matter into a specific kind of thing. For instance, think of bronze as matter. When a sculptor turns that bronze into a statue, the statue's form is what reshapes the bronze. The bronze stays put, is the form that gets altered. In living beings, this form is called the soul. Not some otherworldly substance living in a body, but rather the organizing force giving matter life, turning random chemicals into a cohesive, functioning organism. The human soul, in particular, is what makes a human body truly human. Take away the soul, and you just have tissues and organs, not a living person. This becomes key when we dig into Aquinas' ideas on human nature. Moving on to the core of Aquinas' metaphysical thoughts, we hit the belief that existence itself is the ultimate reality, the top-notch perfection. This marks his biggest original idea. Neither Aristotle nor earlier philosophers saw existence like this. Aristotle put form at the top of the actuality ladder, and for Neoplatonists it was the one or the good. But Aquinas pointed out that existence, or esse, is the force that brings everything else to life. Why is existence seen as the ultimate actuality? Because everything else leans on it. You can't have form unless there's existence. You can't have anything, substance, accident, act, or even a soul, without existence as a foundation. It's existence that brings other things from merely possible to real. So, existence is the most foundational act, the pillar all other actions rest upon. These thoughts lead to profound insights. They imply that God, as pure existence itself, holds all perfections. Every trait, excellence and goodness we see in creatures pre-exists in God in a more profound way. Given that existence underpins all actuality, and actuality trumps potentiality, being is superior to non-being, making God as pure being immeasurably perfect. God doesn't acquire goodness, wisdom, or power as extra properties. He embodies them in their purest, infinite forms. So how can one entity be the sum of multiple perfections? How is it possible that God is both wisdom, power, and goodness if these attributes differ? Aquinas argues that these variations exist only from our viewpoint. We notice different facets and assign them different labels, but God, being utterly simple, merges all perfections into one essence. God's wisdom is God's power, God's goodness is God's existence. There's no mixture in God, no division between essence and existence, no split between substance and attributes. God represents pure unity, pure actuality, pure being. Critics often claim this is too puzzling. If God is purely simple, how can he hold multiple perfections? If all tributes are the same within God, then wisdom becomes power, which seems nonsensical. Aquinas replies that while the attributes are the same in reality, they're distinct in how they relate to creation. When calling God wise, it means God brings about wise outcomes in a way that reflects what we deem wisdom. When calling God powerful, is that God achieves results akin to what we consider power. The distinction lies in our comprehension and usage of these terms, not in God's own nature. This raises considerable issues about theological expressions. If discourse about God isn't literal, and all descriptors are merely analogous, then how much do we truly understand about God? Aquinas developed a nuanced analogy theory to tackle this question. He differentiated between saying something univocally, where a term holds the exact same meaning across subjects, equivocally, where a term bears entirely different meanings, and analogically, where a term carries connected but not identical meanings. Calling a dog and a human healthy is an example of analogical use. Dogs and humans are both healthy, but their health isn't the same because they're different creatures. Just like that, when we call a creature and God good, it's by analogy. A creature is good by participating in goodness, with a limited amount of it as a quality they've received. God, on the other hand, is good by being goodness itself, the endless source from which all created goodness stems. This lets Aquinas assert something about God without claiming we can fully grasp the divine nature. We know God is good, but we don't understand what pure, limitless goodness truly is. We grasp this through analogy, seeing that the goodness in creatures must pre-exist in a more perfect form in their course. This keeps God's transcendence and human understanding intact, balancing God's unknowability with meaningful theological discussion. But questions remain. If existence is ultimate perfection and God is pure existence, why does anything else exist? What prompts pure being to create less than perfect beings? Aquinas explains that creation is an expression of divine love. God doesn't create from need, since God needs nothing. Creation is God's generous act of sharing existence with other beings. It doesn't increase God's perfection, but it showcases it through a variety of beings reflecting divine goodness in different ways. However, this brings up the problem of evil. If God is pure existence and goodness, and if God creates everything, where does evil originate? Aquinas can't say God creates evil. That'd accuse God of causing evil. He suggests evil isn't a positive entity, but a lack of a good that should be present. Blindness is evil not because it's something, but because it's the absence of sight in a creature that should see. Sin is evil not as an action, but as action missing proper order, not aligning with reason and divine law. Critics aren't convinced. Cancer isn't just missing health, but is actively destructive. Cruelty isn't just missing kindness, but is malicious. Aquinas would reply that these acts are indeed real, but their evil lies in what they're missing, the right order or proper alignment to good. Cancer involves cells reproducing. Reproduction is good, but lacks the regulation needed for health. Cruelty involves power, which is good, but lacks the direction towards true goodness that makes it virtuous. The debate on this view's success is ongoing. It shields God's goodness by denying God creates evil as a tangible reality, but might downplay suffering's reality, sometimes sounding like philosophical jargon amidst genuine horrors. Yet Aquinas doesn't deny the realness of evil's effects. He discusses its metaphysical status. Evil is destructively real, but lacks substance on its own, existing as corruption or absence of good in inherently good things. Aquinas' metaphysics extends to his understanding of truth. To him, truth is when the mind matches reality. If your thoughts align with how things truly are, those thoughts are true. If you think horses exist, and they do, your thinking aligns with reality, hence it's true. This seems simple but has deep implications. Firstly, truth relies on existence. Without things having definite natures, thoughts have nothing to align with. Truth assumes a stable, intelligible reality. Secondly, things are true before we think about them. The truth of horses existing doesn't depend on anyone's thought. Things have truth by matching their divine idea. Every creature is true as it fulfills its essence and purpose. This sets up a truth hierarchy. Things match divine ideas for truth. Human thoughts match things for truth, and language matches thought for truth. Truth at each level involves correspondence or alignment with some standard. The highest authority is the divine intellect that knows everything because it's behind everything. God's knowing is creative. He brings things into existence by knowing them. In contrast, our knowledge is more about receiving. We learn by getting impressions from the outside world through our senses and then understanding them. But what about math and logic? These seem not to be part of the physical world. There are no actual perfect circles or infinite sets in nature. Yet mathematical truths seem undeniably and forever true. Aquinas believes these truths reside in God's mind. God is aware of all possible mathematical relationships because he grasps the divine essence, which can be mirrored in endless ways. The eternal truths of math and logic reflect the undying structure of divine thinking. When we uncover mathematical truths, we're tapping into God's knowledge, even if not fully or perfectly. This metaphysical framework, from distinguishing between essence and existence to defining truth, lays the groundwork for all of Aquinas' philosophy. It explains why God exists, why the world makes sense, why we can truly know things, why universal natures exist despite individual differences, why change doesn't erase identity, and why there's a mix of perfection and imperfection. It's like a masterfully constructed building, with every part supporting the whole. But is it on solid ground? Modern philosophy has questioned nearly every part of it. The distinction between essence and existence is seen by some as either too obvious or meaningless. The idea of substance and accidents has been swapped in many modern views for just collections of properties or events. The analogy of being is sometimes dismissed as empty, and not truly descriptive of God. The principle of sufficient reason is rejected by those who accept brute facts and ultimate uncertainty. Despite these challenges, Aquinas' metaphysics still has supporters. Today's analytical Thomists believe his ideas can be updated for modern discourse and still tackle issues that analytical metaphysics faces: the nature of existence, the basis of possibility, the problem of universals, and the link between essence and identity. Whether you agree with Aquinas or not, the depth and careful thought in his metaphysical vision are impressive. It stands as one of the most thorough attempts to make sense of the world. Part 3. The 5 Ways to God. After setting up his philosophical groundwork, Aquinas dives into a big question in both philosophy and theology. Is there really a God? Can we actually prove it, or do we need to rely on faith? For Aquinas, the answer is pretty straightforward. We can use reason to show that God exists, without needing the Bible or divine revelation. However, his reasoning is quite complex, and he presents not just one but 5 different arguments, each looking at the question from a unique perspective. These arguments are famously known as the 5 Ways, and are introduced early on in the Summa Theologica. They're quite concise, almost like snapshots. Aquinas had explored them in detail in other writings, such as the Summa contra Gentiles, but here he expected his well-read audience to be aware of the philosophical background. This brevity has sparked a lot of discussion over the years about what exactly these arguments claim, and whether they are convincing. An important note before delving into the arguments: Aquinas isn't trying to prove the Christian God with all the specific details. He's not aiming to justify the Trinity, the Incarnation, or any particular Christian belief. That's where revelation comes in. What he's attempting to demonstrate is the existence of a being with key attributes: necessary existence, immutability, causality, perfection, and intelligence. Once these traits are confirmed, Aquinas argues, we can identify this being as God, although true understanding needs revelation. The first way focuses on motion or change. Aquinas kicks off with something we all notice. Things around us are constantly changing. Water turns into ice, acorns grow into oak trees, students gain knowledge and the clueless become informed. Change is all around. But what does change mean? Following Aristotle, Aquinas sees change as realizing potential. Water can become ice potentially, and then actually turns into ice. An acorn potentially becomes an oak tree, then actually becomes one. It's the shift from potential to actual. Here's the catch: nothing can change itself from potential to actual. Why? Because realizing potential requires something that's already actual. Water can't freeze itself. It needs cold temperatures. An acorn can't grow by itself. It needs soil, water, and sunlight. A thing can't be both actual and potential in the same way. So anything that changes is altered by something already actual. This creates a sequence of movers. Water freezes because of cold air, which changes due to atmospheric conditions, which change because of the sun's radiation, and so forth. Can this chain go back endlessly? Aquinas says no, not because an infinite temporal regression is automatically impossible, which he believes can't be philosophically proved, but because an infinite regress of essentially ordered causes is impossible. It's a critical point that's often misunderstood. Aquinas isn't saying the universe must have started at a specific moment. He claims that faith teaches the universe began, but reason can't prove it. His argument is that right now, this instant, the chain of causes for current changes must lead back to something that doesn't need any changing. An essentially ordered series works because the middle links get their power from the first cause, like a stick pushing a stone. The stick moves because a hand pushes it. The hand moves because muscles push it, and on it goes. Remove the initial push, and the sequence breaks down. So Aquinas decides there has to be a prime mover that sets everything in motion without being moved itself. This being is pure actuality, with no potentiality, as any potential would mean it could be moved by something else. Aquinas tags this unmoved mover as the God we all recognize. The second way contends with efficient causation. We see that things cause other things. Fire produces heat. Parents bring about children. Choices lead to actions. Something can't cause itself, because that would mean it exists before it actually exists, which makes no sense. So every effect stems from a previous cause. But once again, can this chain stretch on infinitely? Aquinas says no. If there was no original cause, then none of the middle causes would exist, and therefore no effects would be seen. Remove the first cause and the whole chain of events disappears. Imagine a line of dominoes. Without the first one falling, none would topple over. Without an initial cause to set things in motion, nothing in the series would exist. So there needs to be an uncaused starting point that sets everything in motion. This is what we call God. The third way talks about things being contingent or necessary. We notice stuff comes into being and disappears. People are born and die, mountains get worn down, stars appear and explode. These are contingent. They exist without needing to. If everything was contingent, then once, at some point, nothing would exist. Why? Because a contingent thing eventually doesn't exist over infinite time. But if nothing existed at any point, then nothing could come into being later, because you can't get something from nothing. Yet things do exist, so not everything can be contingent. There should be at least one necessary being, something whose existence doesn't rely on anything else. Could this necessary being need something else to exist? Could there be a chain of necessary beings relying on each other? Aquinas argues that leads to an endless loop, which doesn't work for reasons already discussed. So there must be a being that exists by its very nature, not because of anything else. A being whose very essence is to exist, whose core and existence are one. This is what we call God. The fourth way talks about levels of perfection. We notice things have various degrees of goodness, truth, dignity, and other qualities. Some things are better, truer, or nobler than others. Terms like better, truer, and nobler only make sense if there's a maximum level to relate to. For example, we call something hot or cold based on the highest level of heat. We call something good based on the highest level of goodness. Thus Aquinas suggests there must be something that is the highest in goodness, truth, and nobility, something that causes goodness, truth, and nobility in everything else. Just as something extremely hot causes other things to heat up, there must be the most perfect being causing perfection in everything else. This utmost being is God. The fifth way considers the order of the world, or how things have a purpose. We see natural things without intelligence act towards specific goals. Acorns turn into oak trees, never into something like elm trees or stones. Planets keep stable orbits, and chemical reactions follow rules. These natural things act as if they are directed. But how can something without intelligence aim for a goal? Aquinas argues that only intelligence can direct these. An arrow hits a target not because it thinks, but because an archer aims it. Similarly, natural things need an intelligent guide toward their goals. This intelligent guide is what we call God. These 5 arguments are a big deal in Western philosophy, frequently discussed and debated as proof of God's existence. For many years they were accepted. However, starting with David Hume and Immanuel Kant in the 1700s, they faced serious objections. Modern thinkers have been largely critical of them, yet they persist. Even today, philosophers defend, alter, and debate these ideas. What are the main criticisms? First off, why can't there be an infinite regress? That's probably the biggest question. Aquinas says an endless series of causes isn't possible, but why? Mathematicians deal with endless sequences all the time. In calculus, infinite series can add up to a limit. Why can't reality have infinite causal links? Supporters of Aquinas clarify by distinguishing between accidentally ordered and essentially ordered series. An accidentally ordered series is one where each link can exist and function independently. For instance, your father caused you to exist, and your grandfather caused your father, and so on. Once you're alive, you aren't dependent on your father to continue living. This chain of causes could stretch infinitely backward without contradiction. An essentially ordered series works differently. Every part leans on everything that came before it at the same time. Think of a train. Each train car moves only because it's pulled by the car ahead, which gets its pull from the car in front of it, and so forth. If every car is just being pulled without one generating power, the train doesn't budge. There needs to be an engine giving power on its own. Likewise, if every cause in an essentially ordered series gets its power from the one before, and it goes on endlessly, then nothing would really have power and nothing would be caused. But skeptics question, why assume all causal series are like this? Maybe most are only accidental. Perhaps the universe is an endless chain of causes with no starting point. Each event springs from a prior event, and that should suffice as an explanation. Why push for an initial cause outside the series? Aquinas would say this misses the point of what's being explained. We're not just wondering why this event instead of that. We're asking why there's any ability to cause anything in the first place. Even a universe with endless causes would need something providing causal power to the entire sequence. But how convincing is this? David Hume famously said we might just need to explain each part of the series. If A is explained by B, B by C, and so on, haven't we covered it all? Why demand more explanation for the whole series than the individual parts already offer? Aquinas would argue that understanding how causal power spreads among causes doesn't really explain causal power's very existence, yet critics aren't buying it. Also, why assume the first cause is God? Even if the arguments hint at a first mover, cause, necessary being, and so on, why lump these into one being? Why not multiple gods or a first cause that's neither good nor particularly clever? Aquinas provides more reasoning, which isn't in the 5 ways. He insists there can't be multiple necessary beings as necessity doesn't have limits. A necessary being can't depend on external limits, as then its existence would be conditional. Unlimited equals infinite and singular. 2 infinite beings can't coexist as they'd limit each other, so only one necessary being exists. For Aquinas, the first cause also embodies all perfections, since pure actuality can't be lacking. Any deficiency implies potentiality, clashing with pure act. Hence the first mover is also the first cause, necessary being, ultimate perfection, and intelligent governor. Critics claim extra arguments imply the 5 ways alone don't prove his entire point. They might show something with certain qualities exists, but linking that to the God of classical theism takes additional, contentious premises. The analogy of being causes issues too. When Aquinas calls the first cause supremely good or smart, what does that mean? If good and intelligent are analogies, used differently for God than for us, did we really prove anything? Did we confirm something good and intelligent, or just that something exists to which we apply these terms without fully getting them? Aquinas argues that analogy offers real, if incomplete, understanding. We know God is good because God causes goodness in creatures and possesses it profoundly. This counts as real knowledge, though it's not comprehension. Critics nevertheless wonder if this salvages the arguments or acknowledges their shortcomings. If we can't grasp what calling God good or intelligent means, have we actually proven anything meaningful? Moreover, Kant's critique takes aim at these arguments' core. Kant contended that existence isn't an actual predicate. It doesn't enhance what we grasp about an entity. When I say God is real, I'm not just giving God some new feature. I'm saying that God, as a concept, actually exists in the real world. What this implies is that you can't just prove something exists by thinking about it. You need actual experience, not just pure reasoning. This is especially true for the ontological argument, which even Aquinas turned down. But the critique could also apply to the 5 ways. Do these arguments genuinely come from experience, or are they sneaking in necessary ideas? When Aquinas claims there's a necessary being, Is he basing that on what we observe, or just on theoretical analysis? If it's the latter, then Kant's critique comes into play. Supporters of Aquinas argue he relies on experience. He begins with what we observe: changes, causes, things that could or could not exist, levels of quality and order. From these realities, he deduces what must exist for them to be true. It's not about proving existence through ideas, but discovering causes through their effects. These arguments rely on observation, not pure thought. But the discussion on whether this approach truly addresses Kant's critique is ongoing. Fifth, these arguments rest on certain metaphysical ideas that many today challenge. These include the principle of sufficient reason, the disbelief in the true infinities in reality, preferring reality over potential, and the belief in ultimate purposes in nature. Each of these is up for debate. Science today suggests events without causes, especially at the quantum level. Modern math accepts the possibility of real infinities. Contemporary philosophy often dismisses the idea of final purposes as human-like thinking. If these principles are flawed, do the arguments fall apart? Not necessarily, say Aquinas' supporters. Quantum uncertainty might say subatomic events aren't caused by earlier events, but it doesn't prove they lack cause in the way Aquinas considered important. The matter isn't whether each event has a past cause, but whether things need an ongoing cause for their existence now. Mathematical infinities may make sense theoretically, but don't necessarily mean that endless real-life causal chains can exist. And even if final causes don't fit with particles, they certainly resonate with living things and perhaps the universe at large. Sixth, does modern cosmology disrupt the arguments? If the universe started with the Big Bang, does that back Aquinas up or work against him? On one hand, it suggests a first moment, implying a first cause. On the other hand, Aquinas said you can't prove the universe had a beginning through reason, yet science seems to show it did. Plus, if time began with the Big Bang, what does it mean to talk about a cause before time started? Can there be cause without time involved? Today, Aquinas supporters claim the Big Bang doesn't really affect his arguments. He wasn't insisting on a beginning of time, but that even an eternal universe needs a cause for its current existence. The quest isn't about what started it all, but what keeps it going now. Even an eternal universe would still be contingent, depend on essence and existence, be in motion and need a cause. But what about quantum fluctuations? Some physicists think universes can pop out of quantum vacuum states. Does this natural explanation make God unnecessary? Aquinas' defenders respond by saying quantum fluctuations happen in fields controlled by physical laws which aren't nothing. The bigger questions still linger, like why quantum fields exist, why they have the characteristics they do, and why laws are in place. The search for explanations continues. Seventh, the presence of evil challenges the idea that the first cause is completely good. If God is all good and all powerful, why does evil exist? This isn't directly about the 5 ways, but questions linking the first cause to the God of traditional theism. Aquinas tackles this extensively elsewhere, suggesting evil is a lack, and God allows it for greater good outcomes. Yet many struggle with this faced with deep suffering. Lastly, there's the ironic critique from another believer, William Paley. Paley's famous watchmaker argument seems to outshine Aquinas' 5th way. Paley suggests that discovering a watch implies a watchmaker due to its obvious design, just like finding eyes, wings, and complex organs implies an intelligent designer. This feels more naturally persuasive than Aquinas' abstract talk of final causes. However, Aquinas might say that Paley's argument falls short because it only points to an intelligent designer, not a necessary being or first cause. The designer might just be part of the created world, not the ultimate reason for existence. These arguments have evolved over time. The Kalam cosmological argument, brought back by William Lane Craig, claims the universe has a starting point. Whatever starts needs a cause, so the universe must have a cause. This taps into modern cosmology more than Aquinas did. The fine-tuning debate highlights how specific physical constants need to be for life to exist, suggesting design. Philosophers like Richard Swinburne argue that God's existence might explain many aspects of reality collectively, even if no single argument settles it all. But the core question remains: what counts as proof of God's existence? If we're talking mathematical proof, with zero doubt, then maybe nothing can prove it because God isn't a number. If it's about scientific proof, testable and measurable, then no go, as God isn't a testable theory. But if we look at it as a philosophical demonstration, showing conclusions follow from certain premises, then the arguments might hold if those premises are true. Aquinas' 5 ways remain valid philosophical discussions. Advocates continue to defend and polish them. Critics keep challenging and dismissing them. This debate likely won't end because it hinges on deep-rooted beliefs about explanation, causation, necessity, and existence. Those okay with brute facts will dismiss the arguments. Those believing everything needs a reason will find them compelling. No one can deny their historical impact. They have shaped Western theology and philosophy for ages, forming the backbone of natural theology, the effort to understand God through reason. They have influenced Islamic, Jewish, and Christian philosophies, setting the stage for discussions about faith versus reason, science versus religion, and philosophy versus theology. Even detractors must seriously engage with these ideas. They also raise pressing questions. Is reality ultimately understandable or a mystery? Does existence explain itself, or need something beyond? Should we hunt for ultimate explanations, or accept that some things don't have answers? Can reason extend beyond the empirical world to truths about ultimate reality? These aren't just academic musings. They shape our understanding of ourselves, our universe, the possibility of meaning and purpose, and the validity of religious belief. While Aquinas' arguments might not conclusively prove God, they emphasize that the question of God is rational, not mere blind belief or random selection. They highlight that believing or doubting God's existence affects everything else: reality's nature, ethics' foundation, knowledge's possibility, and life's meaning. This is perhaps their enduring legacy, making the question of God unavoidable for anyone seriously pondering reality's fundamentals. Part 4. Natural law and moral truth. How do we figure out right from wrong? Where does our sense of morality come from? Is it just something people invented, or did it come from God? Or maybe it's something that's part of the universe itself? These big questions sit at the core of ethics, and Aquinas' natural law theory has been a huge influence on Western moral and legal thinking for hundreds of years. Aquinas kicks things off with a bold idea. Morality isn't just random. What's right and wrong isn't a matter of personal opinion, cultural habits, or God's whims. It's built into human nature and can be understood by everyone, no matter their beliefs or situations. This is what's known as natural law, moral truths that are part of the very fabric of reality. To really get this, we need to know how Aquinas sees the concept of law in general. He says law is an order of reason aimed at the common good, created by whoever is responsible for the community and communicated to everyone. Law isn't just about force or control. It's about guiding actions towards good goals using understanding. Law seeks the common good rather than personal gain. Aquinas identifies 4 levels of law, set up in a hierarchy. First, there's eternal law, which is God's plan for the universe. This divine wisdom rules everything, from the movements of planets to moral rules for people. It's the ultimate design of the universe. But we can't completely understand eternal law because our human minds are limited. We can't fully grasp God's entire plan. So how do we find moral truth? That's where the second type, natural law, comes in. Natural law is how rational beings participate in eternal law. It's the part of God's plan we can discover through reason by examining human nature. The main idea is that because we are rational beings, We can understand our own nature and figure out what helps us thrive. We can determine which actions improve us and which harm us. This understanding is natural law. It's something like having a moral compass inside us, as St. Paul mentioned. We have this natural ability, which Aquinas calls synderesis, to grasp basic moral principles. It's not that we're born knowing every little moral rule, but we have an inborn sense of leaning towards good and turning away from evil. The core principle of natural law is straightforward. Pursue and do good, avoid evil. It may sound obvious, like it's just explaining what good and evil mean, but it's the starting point for everything else. It guides us towards perfecting our nature and turning away from what spoils it. It's self-evident in the way that anyone who understands the concept can't deny it. From this foundational principle, Aquinas develops fundamental precepts of natural law. These align with basic human instincts, some of which we share with other creatures. First, like all living things, humans are inclined to protect their existence. This gives rise to the idea that life should be safeguarded. You shouldn't kill innocent people or harm yourself. Second, like animals, humans lean towards reproduction and nurturing their young. This leads to principles regarding sexuality and family life. Sexual acts should aim for procreation, within stable relationships where kids can be brought up. Parents have duties to their children. Third, as thinking beings, humans have tendencies towards knowledge and social life. We naturally seek truth, including spiritual truth. We form communities and strive for peace with others. These inclinations form the basis for principles about education, religion, justice, and social cooperation. We should seek truth, honour God, live peacefully with others, and work for the common good. These main precepts are universal and don't change. They apply to all humans at all times and places because they stem from human nature, which doesn't shift. Anyone who reasons correctly can understand them. This is why Paul points out that even those without scripture show that the law is written on their hearts, their consciences attesting to it. But figuring out moral questions doesn't stop with these general ideas. From these basic rules, we get more specific guidelines, known as secondary precepts, that apply the general ideas to real-life situations. This is where things can get tricky and less clear-cut. Secondary precepts need good judgment, or prudence, to figure out the right thing to do in specific cases. The primary precepts are known to everyone and never change, but secondary ones can differ and be misunderstood. Take, for example, the primary rule to preserve life. How do we interpret that in particular cases? Is it wrong to kill in every circumstance? What about self-defense, or during a war or capital punishment? Different situations might be justified based on the basic principle, and that's where people start to disagree. Not so much on the principle itself, but on how it's applied. Aquinas points out that even well thought out secondary rules might have exceptions in rare cases. The usual no lying rule could be put aside if lying is needed to save an innocent person from harm. This isn't about moral flexibility. The main precepts stay firm, but sometimes special situations call for sensitive handling that seems at odds with typical secondary rules. Apart from a primary and secondary precepts, we have human law, which is created by governments. Human law should stem from natural law, either directly or by specifying it for specific societies. Like natural law tells us to punish crime, but it doesn't say exactly how. Human laws do the detailing, deciding penalties for crimes like theft and assault. Good human laws align with natural law, aiming for the common good and reflecting sound moral ideas. Yet human lawmakers can make mistakes or act badly, leading to laws that stray from natural law. When that happens, these laws become unjust and lose their legitimacy. They're more about force than reason. Aquinas famously says that an unjust law isn't really a law and doesn't have moral force. This opens up the option to rightly disobey such laws. If a human law goes against natural law, we must stick with natural law. If the government tells us to worship false gods, harm the innocent or do wrong, we should refuse. Natural law overrules human law. Though this principle can challenge political power, it's been used in history to stand up against tyranny and unfair orders. Martin Luther King referenced it in his letter from Birmingham jail to back his peaceful resistance against segregation laws. Then there's divine law, which comes from Scripture. Why need this if natural law is in place? Aquinas provides a few reasons. First, even though primary natural laws can be grasped through reason, people often fall short due to sin, emotions, and ignorance. Divine law clarifies moral truth, making it certain and understandable for everyone, even for those not versed in philosophy. Second, divine law points us to our ultimate purpose, a heavenly existence with God, which is beyond natural reasoning's reach. Third, divine law deals with our intentions and thoughts, not just outward actions, holding us accountable for inner motivations. The 10 Commandments are a great example of divine law, mostly repeating what natural law says. Don't kill, don't steal, honor parents, avoid adultery. These are confirmed by the divine. Additionally, divine law introduces specific religious rules like Sabbath observance and monotheism that go beyond natural reasoning. Now let's delve into a key and debated part of Aquinas' natural law theory, the doctrine of double effect. This idea tries to address moral challenges, where an action leads to both positive and negative outcomes. When can you do something knowing it might cause harm while aiming for good? Aquinas explores this with self-defense. Is it okay to kill someone attacking you in self-defense? Initially, this seems to clash with the rule against killing, but Aquinas suggests a single act can have 2 outcomes, saving your life and causing the attacker's death. The morality of what you do hinges on what you intend. There are 4 conditions to meet for an action, with double effects to be ethically acceptable. First off, the action must be good or at least not morally wrong on its own. Defending yourself isn't inherently bad. Next, the person must aim for the good outcome, not the bad one. You're trying to save your own life, not kill the attacker. The attacker's death is expected but not your goal. Also, the good outcome shouldn't come from the bad one. Your survival comes from stopping the attack, not because the attacker dies. Lastly, there needs to be a compelling reason. The good that comes out of it must be worth the risk of the bad happening. Saving your life justifies the potential of causing death. This principle applies to many tough situations. Think about abortion to save a mother's life. Directly ending the fetus's life is wrong because the act is inherently bad, and the positive effect comes through the bad one. However, removing a cancerous uterus with a fetus inside is allowed. The act itself is to remove cancer and save the mother, not to kill the fetus. The fetus's death is a foreseen side effect, not the goal, and the mother's survival isn't because the fetus dies, but because the cancer is removed. It's a tragic side effect, not a method. Now consider wartime bombing. Directly targeting civilians is always wrong, but hitting a military target near civilians can be okay if the 4 conditions are met. The military action is justified. The intention is to hit the target, not harm civilians. The goal isn't achieved through civilian casualties, and the target's importance matches the risk of civilian harm. Critics have many objections to the double effect principle. First, the line between intending a result and just seeing it as unavoidable seems shaky. If I know my action will cause a death, isn't that almost like intending it? If I do something knowing what it will lead to, isn't that the same as choosing the outcome? Aquinas would argue intention is about means and ends, not just predictable outcomes. I can choose an action for its purpose and regret certain outcomes that follow. Second, it seems the doctrine lets people dodge moral responsibility using fancy words. I can twist my intention description to make my actions seem okay. If I bomb civilians, I might say I aim to damage buildings and lower morale and just foresee deaths. This feels like an excuse. Aquinas would say self-deception is possible, but genuine use of the doctrine demands looking honestly at true intentions, not wordplay. Third, there's the randomness of separating acts from effects. In an abortion, why is removing the uterus one action, with two results rather than two separate actions? Taking out the uterus and ending the fetus's life. How do we separate actions? Aquinas would say actions are defined by their immediate goal, what they achieve directly. Taking out an organ is one action. Its effects on what's inside are consequences, not part of the act. And why does intentional harm count more than foreseen harm? If 5 people will die anyway, why is it worse to plan their deaths than to foresee them dying unintentionally? Isn't the outcome the main concern morally? This critique relies on consequentialism, saying only results matter. Aquinas disagrees. He believes intention shapes moral character, that deliberately choosing wrong harms the will differently than when evil is just a side result. We are more accountable for what we aim to do than what we allow to happen. These criticisms show the conflicts in Aquinas' moral theory. He strives to uphold absolute bans on inherently wrong acts while permitting hard choices in complex cases. Double effect is his way to balance this. Whether it works is a hot topic in moral and medical ethics. But let's set double effect aside and look at wider challenges to natural law theory. First, the is-ought issue. David Hume famously argued you can't derive ought from his moral rules from facts. Aquinas appears to do just this. He examines human nature and tendencies to pull out moral guidelines. So why does wanting something make it okay for us to chase after it? Aren't rapists and thieves just following their natural urges too? Aquinas would argue that not all urges are equally natural. Some align with our rational side, while others spring from wayward desires linked to sin. Natural law is about the instincts of rational beings, functioning as they should, not just acting on any whim. But this leads to the question, how do we figure out which urges are truly natural to us? It seems like we need some moral understanding first to spot the right urges, which means we're not really finding moral clues from nature. We're imposing them onto nature. Next up is the issue of human nature itself. Is there something like human nature in Aquinas' sense? Modern biology shows us immense diversity and change. Human nature has evolved and keeps evolving. Evolutionary psychology suggests many of our urges are adaptations that help with survival and reproduction in ancient times, not reflections of eternal essences. Without a fixed human nature, the foundation for natural law crumbles. Aquinas might say, despite differing traits, there's a shared human nature based on rationality and the capability for moral action. All humans, unless severely impaired, can reason about goals and methods, grasp universal principles, make choices freely, and be accountable for those choices. This core of rational action is what defines human nature here. Differences in other traits are side issues, not core ones. But critics push harder. Even if human nature exists, why should what's natural be morally good? Nature has disease, death, predators, suffering. Natural disasters strike without mercy. Cancer is natural. Should we consider these good? Why assume what feels natural is what we ought to do? Aquinas might reply by distinguishing between nature as what happens in the world and nature as what fulfills a thing's true purpose. Not everything that occurs is natural in the ideal sense. Illness is a lack of health, a malfunction in natural order. Cancer is about cells misbehaving, not functioning properly. Natural law focuses on what perfects our nature, not just what occurs. But then, how do we tell what perfects human nature compared to what messes it up? Seems like we need some moral instincts for that. Aquinas claims reason can figure this out, but some question whether reason alone, without moral biases, can really determine what perfects or corrupts us. It feels like a loop. We decide natural urges based on what we believe is good, then we claim what's good comes from natural urges. Third, cultural differences challenge the idea of universality. Anthropologists note sharp contrasts in moral beliefs across various societies. Some accept polygamy, others don't. Some engage in infanticide under specific situations, others find it revolting. Some cherish personal freedom, others focus on collective well-being. If natural law is universal and knowable through reason, why the vast differences? Aquinas might say that the differences are mainly in secondary rules and their implementation, not primary ones. Every culture acknowledges duties like safeguarding life, nurturing children, fostering cooperation, and seeking truth. Discrepancies arise in applying these principles based on context, shaped by distinct histories and traditions. But this downplays actual moral disagreements. Some cultures practiced cannibalism, human sacrifice, slavery, honor killings. Are these merely different interpretations of shared principles, or do they point to fundamentally different moral foundations? Finally, the Euthyphro dilemma re-emerges. Is something right because it aligns with natural law, or does it align with natural law because it's right? If it's the former, morality hinges on facts about human nature, but facts alone don't create moral duties. If it's the latter, then natural law merely catalogues morality, failing to explain it, meaning we need another explanation for why things are right or wrong. Aquinas tries to find a middle ground. Natural law is rooted in eternal law, God's rational plan. Things are right because they adhere to God's wisdom, not just because God dictates so arbitrarily. God's wisdom understands the essence of things and suggests actions that enhance those essences. So, natural law isn't random, nor is it independent of Him. It mirrors God's purposeful design for creation to reach their appropriate goals. Yet this brings up a further question. Why does God's wisdom choose certain things over others? Is it because they are truly good, or do they become good simply because God chooses them? If it's the first, then goodness is separate from God's wishes. If it's the second, morality seems random, hinging on divine whims. Aquinas might say this is a false choice when it comes to God. To God, wisdom and will are tied to His divine essence. God doesn't pick the good, God embodies good. Divine wisdom doesn't see goodness as something external. God's very nature is goodness. Thus morality isn't random nor separate from God, as God's own nature sets the standard of goodness. Whether this actually solves the issue or just shifts it is still up for debate. Some critics contend it makes morality reliant on God's nature, not His will, but still leaves the question, why is God's nature inherently good? Supporters argue that question misinterprets the matter. God isn't good by measuring up to an outside benchmark. God is the benchmark, the origin of goodness itself, with all perfections existing within Him in their fullest form. Then there's the issue of natural law leading to seemingly unyielding rules. Aquinas claims some actions are naturally evil, no matter the context or outcomes. Lying is always wrong. Birth control is always wrong. These strict bans seem to dismiss morally significant factors. What if lying can rescue innocent people? What if birth control can prevent serious issues? Aquinas permits apparent exceptions through ideas like the double effect and other nuanced principles, but critics see these as last-minute fixes that contradict the strict nature of the bans. If exceptions are allowed through strategic thinking about intentions and actions versus outcomes, what becomes of the firm rules? Supporters argue the exceptions aren't true exceptions. The rules stay firm, but applying them properly means distinguishing acts that directly break the rules from those that follow them, while allowing for bad side outcomes. Even with these challenges, natural law theory holds sway. It offers a take on objective morality, grounded in human nature and reason. It steers clear of the view that morality is based on divine whims, or the view that morality is just a matter of opinion. It provides a foundation for universal human rights and for questioning unfair laws and practices. Modern natural law thinkers like John Finnis, Germain Grisez, and Robert George have updated Aquinas' ideas to tackle some criticisms. They claim basic goods like life, knowledge, friendship, and practical reasonableness are obviously valuable, not stemming from biological urges. These goods give reasons for action that don't rely on religious beliefs. Morality is about honouring these goods in everything we do, never outright harming them even to boost other goods. Whether this new natural law theory succeeds where traditional natural law stumbles is debated. Critics argue it still wrestles with issues like unchanging morals, cultural differences, and the root of moral duty, but it demonstrates that natural law stays a lively tradition, evolving to meet new questions while keeping its core moral insights rooted in human nature and accessible through reason. Part 5. The architecture of virtue. Morality goes beyond just rules and restrictions. It's about turning into a certain type of person. This is the core insight of virtue ethics, and Aquinas provides one of the most nuanced virtue theories in Western philosophy. To him, ethics is mainly about human flourishing, about reaching our full potential as excellent human beings. The idea of virtue started with Aristotle, but Aquinas took it further by blending it with Christian theology. For Aquinas, a virtue is a steady habit that leads us to act well, a stable part of our character that helps us do good things easily, regularly, and with joy. Virtues aren't just one-off actions, but are consistent patterns that define who we are. To understand this, we need to get Aquinas' teleological view. Everything has a telos, or a purpose and goal it naturally aims for. Like the purpose of an acorn is to become an oak tree, and the purpose of an eye is to see. The aim for humans is eudaimonia, another word for flourishing or happiness. But what does human flourishing mean? According to Aquinas, human flourishing is about perfecting our specifically human abilities, especially reason. We thrive when we think clearly, understand things truly, make the right choices, and love rightly. Our ultimate happiness is found in knowing and loving God, the greatest truth and highest good. However, reaching this ultimate end requires building character through virtue. Aquinas breaks down virtues into intellectual ones, which sharpen the mind, and moral ones, which perfect our will and emotions. Intellectual virtues include understanding first principles, using science to demonstrate truths, and wisdom, which grasps the highest causes. These help us know reality as it is, reason correctly, and understand necessary truths. But just knowing what's good doesn't automatically make us act on it, and that's where moral virtues step in. They shape our desires and emotions to line up with reason, so we naturally seek what's truly good and respond to situations with proper emotions. A virtuous person doesn't always battle with opposing desires. Through practice, virtue turns good actions into something natural and enjoyable. There are 4 main virtues, known as the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. They're called cardinal, meaning hinge, because they form the basis for all other virtues. These are the key qualities everyone needs to thrive. Prudence is about practical wisdom, judging rightly in the real world. It's not just cleverness or calculation, but the ability to see real goods and the right ways to achieve them. Prudence cuts through appearances to reality, notices what's morally relevant in situations, and chooses actions that truly support human flourishing. It guides all the other virtues, making sure they're used at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons. Without prudence, other virtues can go wrong. Courage without prudence turns reckless, and generosity without prudence becomes wasteful. Even good intentions need wise judgment on how to accomplish good effectively. That's why Aquinas calls prudence the leading moral virtue, the one steering the others. Justice involves consistently giving others their due, treating them fairly and respecting their rights. Aquinas points out a few types of justice. Commutative justice deals with exchanges between individuals, ensuring fair transactions and compensation for wrongs. Distributive justice concerns how communities share benefits and burdens, requiring not strict equality, but proportionality. Legal justice covers citizens' duties to the community, demanding obedience to just laws and contributions to the common good. Out of all moral virtues, justice stands out as primarily focused on others. While temperance and fortitude target personal perfection, justice is about relationships. It requires seeing others as moral agents with rightful claims, respecting their dignity, and fostering social cooperation. Without justice, society can't function, since it helps people with varying interests and viewpoints live together peacefully. Fortitude is about having the courage and strength to face challenges and overcome obstacles while pursuing good. It involves both taking on challenges that need to be addressed and dealing with issues that can't be changed. Courage stops us from being scared away by fear or pain from doing the right thing. It gives us the resolve to stay true to our principles, to make sacrifices when needed, and to push through tough times. But courage isn't about being reckless or aggressive. It calls for wise decision-making about which risks are worth taking and which aren't. A brave person understands real threats, but doesn't let fear control them. They move forward when it's right, and step back when they should, guided by reasoning on what truly serves good purposes. Temperance, on the other hand, means keeping pleasure in check, especially bodily joys. It keeps our cravings for food, drink, sex, and other sensory delights in line, making sure they benefit us instead of ruling us. Temperance doesn't get rid of pleasure or desire. They're good things themselves. Rather, it organizes them sensibly, letting us enjoy pleasures in a fitting manner and degree. Without temperance, we become slaves to our cravings. We eat for pleasure rather than nourishment. We seek sex for quick pleasure rather than love and creation. Our lives end up centered around indulging these desires and not in pursuing real goods. Temperance sets us free from this hold, allowing us to enjoy pleasures without being under their control. These four key virtues are interconnected. Prudence gives guidance, justice manages interactions, courage provides the drive, and temperance keeps self-discipline intact. Together, they make up the base of moral goodness. Missing even one of these traits shows a character flaw, making consistent goodness impossible. However, Aquinas introduces an essential aspect not covered by Aristotle: the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. These virtues are termed theological because they focus on God and are instilled by divine grace, not human effort. They perfect us not just for our human happiness, but for ultimate bliss, eternal union with God. Faith is the habit of holding truths revealed by God, truths that go beyond what reason alone can uncover. It involves trusting in God's word, accepting mysteries like the Trinity and Incarnation, and believing in God's promises. Faith isn't irrational, as God's revelation doesn't oppose reason, but it surpasses reason's limit. Hope is the firm expectation of good things to come, particularly the hope of eternal life with God. It comforts us during current sufferings and setbacks by keeping our focus on ultimate fulfillment. Hope counters both overconfidence, thinking salvation comes without effort, and despair, losing belief in salvation. It understands that our ultimate good depends on God's grace, while trusting that grace will be given. Charity is loving God for God's own sake and loving others for God's sake. It is the greatest virtue, even more than faith and hope, because it most completely connects us to God and will continue even in heaven when faith and hope are fulfilled by direct comprehension. Charity changes all other virtues, elevating them to a supernatural level and aligning them with eternal, not just temporary goals. Aquinas believes the theological virtues are essential for human perfection, because our natural talents, although enhanced by the cardinal virtues, aren't enough for our supernatural purpose. We aim to see God personally, to partake in divine life, to connect with God in a way far beyond our natural abilities. Only through God's grace, established through faith, hope, and charity, can we reach this goal. But this brings up a conflict. If theological virtues are necessary for our true development, and they're given by grace instead of being earned, then human progress relies on something we don't control, We can't achieve our own perfect state. This seems to challenge the idea of virtue ethics, which stresses the importance of developing character through learning and practice. Aquinas responds by suggesting there's teamwork between our efforts and divine grace. We need to get ready to accept grace through prayer, studying scripture, taking part in religious ceremonies, and practicing natural virtues. Grace complements nature, improving and perfecting our natural skills rather than replacing them. If someone hasn't developed their natural virtues, they'll struggle to fully embrace and carry out theological ones. A generous soul becomes even more giving when charity enhances their generosity. A brave individual gains more courage when hope bolsters their bravery. Yet even theological virtues need to be practiced and nurtured. Faith can grow stronger or weaker depending on whether you nurture it with prayer and reflection or let it slip due to worldly distractions and sin. Hope can flourish through patiently enduring hardships or diminish by becoming too attached to temporary things. Charity increases with acts of love but shrinks with selfish behavior. So even virtues that are infused require human effort and growth. Yet some critics wonder if virtue ethics really addresses moral conflicts. What happens when different virtues compete with each other? If justice calls for punishment, but mercy urges forgiveness, or if courage requires taking risks that prudence advises against. Aquinas would argue that real virtues don't actually clash because they are all guided by prudence towards true human good. Apparent conflicts usually spring from not fully understanding a situation or mistaking fake virtues for real ones. Authentic justice includes mercy, and true courage involves careful prudence. But this seems to drain virtue talk of meaning. If virtues never truly clash, if prudence always sorts things out, then virtue ethics becomes just another form of practical reasoning that advises doing what's best overall. Are individual virtues just labels for good acts in specific areas? Supporters claim virtues offer detailed direction. Justice puts the spotlight on fairness and rights that might otherwise go unnoticed. Temperance warns us about the dangers of excess that might be swept under the rug. Courage points out chances for greatness that prudence might overlook. The virtues are not useless but highlight different aspects of practical wisdom, each focusing on something crucial about living well. Another criticism challenges the idea of virtue unity. Following Aristotle, Aquinas insists that moral virtues are linked. You can't truly have one without the rest. Genuine courage requires justice, temperance, and prudence. Authentic justice needs courage to uphold it, temperance to prevent partiality, and prudence to apply it wisely. The virtues form a cohesive whole. Yet this could seem unrealistic. People can show courage in certain areas yet act cowardly in others. Someone might be strictly fair in their work, but indulgent in their personal life. This unity idea seems to overlook the messy and inconsistent nature of human character. Aquinas would say virtues come in degrees. Someone might have imperfect versions of virtues rather than flawless ones. Imperfect bravery might be displayed by someone who tackles physical threats but runs from moral tests. Perfect virtue integrates all virtues under prudence's direction and is uplifted by charity. Few folks fully attain this in their lifetime, but it's still the goal we should aim for. Critics also doubt if forming habits can really create true virtue. Does repeatedly doing just deeds make a person genuinely just? Or does it just make them follow rules? What if someone acts justly out of fear of punishment or desire for praise instead of true love for justice? Have they really embraced virtue or just learned to mimic it? Aquinas distinguishes between merely doing virtuous acts and actually acting with virtuous intent. Acting virtuously involves not just doing the right thing outwardly, but doing it for the right reasons, with genuine emotions, from a solid and steady character. Virtue isn't just about actions, but a deep-seated trait of character. Habits foster real virtue when they shape both actions and motivations. When repeated just acts nurture a genuine love for justice itself. But how does this occur? How do external actions transform inner character? Aquinas claims that actions can shape our feelings and desires. By continually acting justly, even when it doesn't feel natural, we gradually start to find joy in justice and take satisfaction in fair dealings. Practicing temperance even when tempted chips away at the power of unhealthy desires and strengthens the pull towards moderation. Over time, habit turns into second nature, and virtue becomes a part of who we are. Modern psychology backs this up a bit. Studies on how habits are formed show that doing something repeatedly rewires our brain, making actions feel more automatic and satisfying. Research into moral development shows that engaging in behaviors that benefit others can boost empathy and the drive to be altruistic. However, critics point out that these changes are often fragile and not fully developed. External compliance frequently stays superficial, not leading to deeper character transformation. Moreover, virtue ethics encounters a challenge from the situationist perspective in social psychology. Experiments illustrate how minor situational elements, like finding a coin or being rushed, can significantly impact moral actions. Individuals who seem moral in one scenario might behave differently in another. This indicates that character traits might not be stable, but depend on specific situations. Advocates for virtue ethics argue that these studies assess actions, not the essence of character. Virtue involves not just actions, but also the motives behind them, feelings about them, and the ability to recognize moral importance in situations. True virtue is rare, so discovering that most people don't have consistent character traits doesn't mean virtue is impossible, only that it's uncommon. The situationist challenge highlights that developing true virtue is more challenging than expected, not that it's impossible or unimportant. Despite these hurdles, virtue ethics has gained considerable attention recently. Philosophers find Aquinas' approach more realistic and useful, compared to theories that focus solely on rules or outcomes. Virtue ethics focuses on character, emotions, practical wisdom, and the richness of moral life in a way that resonates with real-world moral experiences. In fields like medical ethics, the virtue ethics approach has become a guide for professional excellence. Instead of just obeying rules or calculating results, good doctors nurture virtues like compassion, integrity, and practical wisdom. Business ethics too is increasingly about fostering virtuous leadership instead of just implementing rules. Political philosophy is once again valuing the role of civic virtue in democratic societies. Whether Aquinas' specific ideas hold up is up for debate. His integration of theological virtues assumes religious beliefs that many do not share. His ideas about human nature face challenges from biology and psychology. His belief that virtue training consistently leads to virtue seems overly optimistic given human nature's resistance to change. Yet his main points remain relevant. Morality is about who we are becoming, not just our actions. That building character involves repetition and practice. That virtues are interconnected and need practical wisdom to guide them. That human well-being involves refining our rational and social abilities. And that genuine excellence involves training both the mind and heart to appreciate what is truly good. These insights hold value regardless of one's stance on metaphysical and theological issues. Part 6. Justice and the Common Good. We're social creatures, naturally political. Living alone doesn't help us thrive. We need various communities from our families to our nations to truly flourish. But how should these communities be structured? Who should lead them? What gives authority its legitimacy? When do we comply? And when should we push back? Aquinas offers a rich political philosophy that's had a big impact on Western ideas about government, law, and social justice. At the heart of Aquinas' thinking is the idea of the common good. The point of political power isn't for rulers to profit, but to benefit the entire community. The common good isn't just adding up individual benefits or aiming for the most happiness for the most people. Instead, it involves setting up conditions that let everyone in a community grow and reach their full social and rational potential. So what makes up the common good? First off, peace and security. Without safety from both external and internal threats, people can't go after other important things. Governments need to handle defence against outside threats and keep the peace inside the country. Next is justice in social interactions. People have to know their agreements will be upheld, their property respected, and any disagreements will be settled fairly with fair compensation if harm is done. Third, people need enough material wealth to live decently. While governments can't make everyone rich, they should create conditions where hard work meets basic needs. Finally, there's the moral and intellectual part. Communities should back education, promote good behaviour, and set up a cultural scene that's good for human growth. This leads to a key issue. Who gets to decide what the common good is? People often have differing ideas on what helps them thrive, what goods to prioritise, and how justice and prosperity should look. Whose vision of the common good rules the day? Aquinas believes the common good isn't just a matter of opinion or endless debate. It's rooted in our shared human nature and the needs and abilities we all have. Though specific policies depend on the situation, basic aspects of the common good can be known through reason by looking at human nature. Natural law gives us objective ways to judge political systems, but someone has to have the authority to make the final call on pursuing the common good. Aquinas says political authority originates from God but comes to us through human agreement and natural social structures. People naturally create hierarchies of authority, parents with their kids, teachers with students, and political leaders with citizens, all based on their roles in achieving the common good. What kind of government should there be? Aquinas thinks about monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. He leans towards monarchy, saying rule by one person is best, in theory, because it's like divine rule and allows for decisive action. A wise and moral king can make fast decisions, carry them out reliably, and be accountable in a way that's tougher with split authority. But Aquinas knows the risks. If a monarch is morally bankrupt or foolish, damage is significant and hard to fix. Tyranny, where the ruler exploits their power for personal gain instead of the common good, is the worst kind of government since it flips what should be best into something terrible. Thus Aquinas suggests a mix of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. A single leader for decisiveness, a council of citizens for wise debate, and everyone's involvement in electing leaders and accepting laws. This setup curtails power concentration and tyranny, while allowing enough unity to make things happen effectively. It blends the unique strengths of each form, avoiding their main flaws. Aquinas' idea shares some traits with the Roman Republic he respected, and is similar to modern constitutional democracies, though he'd likely question ideas like universal voting rights and direct democracy. He believed that smart, moral people should have a bigger say than those who are clueless and corrupt, yet everyone should still have some input. Being involved in politics isn't just a human right, but also a duty that requires learning and moral growth. The most heated topic in Aquinas' political thinking revolves around when to obey rulers and when it's okay to push back. This was a real concern in the 13th century, with popes and emperors grappling for dominance, kings asserting they had absolute power, and Europe shaken by heresy, trials, and religious conflicts. Aquinas' responses were daring and possibly risky for those in power. First off, unjust laws don't hold moral weight. An unjust law isn't actually law, it's more like an act of force, lacking rationality. If a law goes against natural or divine laws, demanding sin or injustice, we not only can, but should disobey it. This principle, based on the Acts of the Apostles, we must obey God rather than men, sets limits that no earthly power can cross. But what makes a law unjust? Aquinas breaks it down into two types. A law can be unjust if it clashes with divine law, telling us to do what God prohibits, or forbidding what God commands. Such laws hold no moral authority at all. Or a law might contradict human welfare by going overboard on burdens or being unfair in how it distributes them. These laws only bind us to avoid scandal or chaos, not because they're truly authoritative. This allows space for civil disobedience. If a law forces you to partake in wrongdoing, like worshipping false deities or harming innocent people, you must refuse, even if it means facing punishment. If a law is just cumbersome or unfair without promoting real sin, you might still follow it to maintain social harmony while striving for change. Aquinas, hence, offers guidance on when to comply, when to passively resist, and when to actively resist. Yet he's wary of rebellion and upheaval. Tyranny is awful, but civil disorder is often worse. He advises patience and prayer when dealing with unjust leaders. Only if tyranny becomes unbearable, if the leader's evil does more damage than an uprising would, and there's a good chance of succeeding, should active pushback be considered. Even then, it should happen via public consensus, not just individuals acting alone. These ideas influence later thinkers like Locke, the American founders, and Martin Luther King. This notion that political power has limits due to natural law, that citizens hold rights rulers must honour, and that unjust laws aren't obligatory, is rooted in Aquinas' work, though others expanded on it later. Aquinas also tackled the church-state relationship, a hot issue in his time. He argued that state and church authorities are separate, but not entirely disconnected. State leaders manage worldly matters for peace, justice and prosperity. Church leaders handle spiritual concerns, teaching doctrine, administering sacraments, leading people to salvation. Each should stay in its lane without overtaking the other's role. However, since spiritual goals are more important, spiritual authority has an edge. When state actions clash with divine law, church authorities must denounce them and free people from having to follow them. When disputes on these boundaries occur, religious leaders have the last word, since they assess by eternal, not just temporal standards. This bold stance backed the idea of papal power over secular rulers. Yet he didn't support unchecked papal dominance. The Pope's power is limited to spiritual matters, and those temporal aspects affecting spiritual well-being. The Pope can't just grab political power or dethrone kings for political reasons. Even papal power has limits, grounded in natural law and the rightful duties of each authority. Modern thinkers generally don't agree with the idea that spiritual authority should trump temporal power. The separation of church and state is all about making sure religious figures don't pull the strings in government. However, Aquinas would argue that you can't completely separate the two. Religious beliefs naturally colour views on justice, the role of government, and what the common good should look like. The real question isn't if religion affects politics, but how it does, through which pathways and with what boundaries. Aquinas' standout contribution to political thought might be his work on just war theory. When is war morally okay? Early Christians leaned toward being pacifists, but by the time Aquinas came around, Christianity had taken on the Roman just war ideas from Augustine. Aquinas fine-tuned these concepts into a clear set of rules for just war. 3 conditions must be met: legitimate authority, just cause, and right intention. First, only governments, not private folks or groups, can start a war. War is a big political move needing the say-so of those managing the common good. Personal violent acts are murder or vigilante justice, while organised violence for public purposes can be justified. Second, there must be a just cause, something bad enough done by the other side that calls for a military reaction. This could be armed attack, severe injustice that can't be fixed any other way, or refusal to fix previous wrongs. Wanting more territory, revenge or glory doesn't cut it. The wrong has to be serious, not imagined or slight. Third, the motive must be right. War should aim to bring back justice and peace, not to vent anger or hatred or to make others suffer unnecessarily. Even with a just cause, the wrong motives taint the action. The end goal should be a just peace, making things right after victory. Later thinkers added more conditions like proportionality and discrimination that Aquinas hinted at. This means the harm from war can't outweigh the good. Non-combatants shouldn't be targeted, and only essential force should be used. These guidelines aim to curb war's destruction, while recognizing that military action is sometimes needed to stop or correct severe wrongs. Just war theory is both praised and criticized. It's lauded for setting moral limits on violence, for telling justified wars apart from unjust ones, and for saying that might doesn't equal right. Critics argue it can justify violence that shouldn't be allowed, give leaders excuses to fight wars that help them while hurting subjects, and be too vague to really be useful in real situations. Pacifists totally reject just war theory, believing that Jesus' peace teachings are absolute, and that war's costs are always too high to justify. Realists, on the other hand, think it's naive, viewing war as about power and survival, where moral restrictions put you at a disadvantage. Sitting between these perspectives, just war theory tries to balance moral limits on violence with the harsh reality of needing to defend against threats. Modern problems add layers to Aquinas' ideas. Can nuclear deterrence fit the just war criteria when it risks massive and indiscriminate destruction? Can terrorism ever meet the requirement of legitimate authority? Does stepping in to stop genocide fit the just cause? How do these old ideas work in counterinsurgency situations with mingled combatants and civilians? Is preemptive war in response to rising threats justified? These questions show that Aquinas gave us a structure that needs further growth, not a finished ethical guide for every scenario. His ideas need to be interpreted and adapted to situations he could never have predicted, yet his core insight stands. The use of force is a moral issue subject to thoughtful analysis. Power must be checked by justice, and even in war, there are moral lines that should not be crossed. Aquinas' political thinking has sometimes been criticized for being too accepting of hierarchy and authority, appearing quick to defend the status quo, and ready to put individual needs below the greater good. It's worth noting that medieval society was very hierarchical, feudal, patriarchal, and authoritarian by today's standards. So, did Aquinas simply excuse these inequalities? It's not quite that simple. True, Aquinas accepted natural hierarchies of authority, believing that certain leadership roles are essential for social order and human well-being. Parents should guide their children, teachers their students, and rulers their citizens. However, he was firm that all authority needed to benefit the common good, and if leaders abused their power for personal gain, they were tyrannical and could be resisted. He recognized everyone's equal worth before God, and insisted that even the least powerful individuals deserve respect from those in power. Would Aquinas have supported today's liberal democracy? Probably not entirely. He likely wouldn't embrace radical individualism that elevates personal autonomy above all else, or moral relativism that dismisses absolute truths about right and wrong. He'd challenge secularism that leaves out religion from public discussions. He'd also be wary of unlimited popular sovereignty without the checks of natural law and constitutional limits. Yet a lot of modern democracy reflects his ideas, like the notion that government should serve the common good rather than personal interests of leaders, the concept of a limited government bound by higher laws, requiring consent from the governed, the right to resist tyranny, protecting fundamental rights, and favouring mixed constitutions with separate powers. Even democratic theorists have borrowed from Thomistic principles while discarding the religious aspects. Today's Catholic social teaching has expanded on Aquinas' ideas, advocating democracy, human rights, economic fairness, and international law, while still highlighting religious values concerning human dignity, the sanctity of life, family, importance, and state power limits. Whether this is loyal to Aquinas' original thought or a reinterpretation is debated, but it underscores his relevance in political discourse. One of the lasting impacts of Aquinas' political philosophy is his view that politics should be a moral endeavour. Governing isn't just about power or efficiency, it's about justice, creating conditions for human well-being and pursuing the common good. Political authority is only legitimate when it's used for appropriate purposes aligned with moral principles. Citizens have a responsibility to support just governments and the right to oppose unjust ones. These ideas remain crucial in today's world, where politics can seem disconnected from ethics, where power games and partisan interests often take centre stage, and where the common good is overlooked amidst various opposing interests. Part 7. Knowledge and Truth. Ever wondered how we know anything at all? How does our mind connect with reality? What ties our thoughts to the world around us? These are the big questions at the heart of epistemology. Aquinas has some pretty nuanced ideas about all this, steering clear of both extreme rationalism and extreme empiricism. For him, our journey of knowing kicks off with our senses. This was a bold idea back in medieval times when everyone was all about Platonic and Augustinian thoughts on innate ideas and divine insight. But Aquinas tosses those aside. He sees the human mind at birth as a blank slate, or tabula rasa in Latin. We aren't born knowing concepts or principles. Everything we learn comes from our experiences, starting from what we sense. Aquinas leans more toward Aristotle here, pushing back against Plato's notion of separate realms filled with pure ideas or innate memories of the forms. Knowledge, he says, comes from interacting with the material world. Our eyes pick up colours and shapes, our ears catch sounds, our hands feel textures. These sensations are the raw stuff of knowledge. But just having senses isn't enough for true knowledge. Animals sense things too, often better than we do. Dogs have a better nose, eagles have sharper eyes, bats have better hearing. But animals don't truly know in the human sense, because they can't pull out universal concepts from particular sensations. They react to specific things but don't grasp universal truths or form judgments about reality. This is where human understanding takes a leap. We have an intellect that goes beyond mere sensation, allowing us to identify universal forms in particular occurrences. When I see different horses, I notice their details. That brown mare, this white stallion, that young foal. But my intellect pulls from these details the universal idea of a horse, an essence common to all, regardless of differences. So how does this abstraction happen? Aquinas breaks it down as phantasms versus intelligible species. A phantasm is like a mental snapshot formed by our senses and kept in our imagination and memory. When I look at a horse, my senses create a phantasm of that specific horse. This phantasm is tied to that individual horse and doesn't directly lead to intellectual knowledge because the intellect grasps universals, not piecemeal sensations. The active intellect, a facet of our mind, works with these phantasms to carve out intelligible species. It illuminates the phantasm, extracting the universal form simmering below the concrete details. It's like stripping away the physical aspects to create a purely intellectual idea that our possible intellect can then comprehend. Think of it like colours needing light to stand out. Colours are there in things, but they become visible when light hits them. Similarly, universal truths are hidden within individual things, but become clear when light is shone upon them by the active intellect. This process is how we gather universal knowledge from particular experiences. I see individual dogs, cats, horses, and from these sensations my intellect derives concepts like dog, cat, horse, and these concepts aren't limited to the specific animals I've seen. They encapsulate the essence of all dogs or cats or horses out there. But here's the tricky part. If all knowledge comes from our senses, which only deal with particulars, how do we grasp universal truths that always hold true, even beyond our universe? Take math for instance. 2 + 2 will always equal 4, regardless of our world state. These truths seem to exist regardless of anything physical. So if all knowledge is supposed to come from what we sense, how do we understand these everlasting truths? Aquinas explains that while the content of our knowledge starts with our senses, its form comes from the intellect itself. When our minds extract universal ideas from specific examples, we don't just grasp their essence, we also notice essential connections between them. Once I get what a triangle is and what having three sides means, I instantly know triangles must have three sides. This realization doesn't come from observing real triangles, but from our intellect comprehending their essence. Similarly, as soon as we truly understand certain terms, their basic truths become obvious. For instance, the principle of non-contradiction. Something can't both exist and not exist in the same context at the same time. And the principle of causality. Every outcome has a reason. Our intellect sees these truths as obvious without needing to witness them, forming the basis for all logical reasoning. That's how we can have sure knowledge even though our senses can be tricked. For example, a stick looks bent when in water, but when our intellect works with well thought out concepts, it doesn't err on these obvious facts or clear arguments. Mistakes happen due to bad premises, flawed thinking, or using principles the wrong way, not because the intellect itself is misunderstanding things. Critics, however, question this way of thinking. First, the split between sensing and understanding might be off. Modern cognitive science suggests understanding isn't just added on afterward. It's part of perception itself, which involves interpreting what we sense, based on concepts and expectations. So the clear-cut line between sensing and understanding might not match how we actually think. Aquinas might argue that he's addressing how we logically come to know things, not the chronological order of our thought process. Even if our senses and understanding work together, there's still a difference conceptually. Our senses make us aware of specific material things, while our understanding helps us grasp universal ideas. These are achievements of the mind that happen together but are different in nature. Second, the idea of abstraction leads to more questions. When I pull out the idea of a horse from seeing individual horses, what's really happening? Am I finding a universal element that's in all horses, or am I just grouping similar creatures mentally? If it's the first, it sounds like bringing back Platonic ideals. If it's the second, universals seem like just mental groupings. Aquinas tries to balance these views with moderate realism. He explains universals exist in three ways: before they exist in God's mind as the idea, during their existence as the shared nature in individuals, and afterward in the human mind as an abstract concept. So universals aren't just mental constructs, because they are real in individuals, but they're not standalone Platonic ideals, because they only exist in specific things and thoughts. This raises more queries about what common nature actually exists in individuals. Take three horses. What's the shared trait aside from their name? They have different genes, looks, and behaviours. Where's the universal nature in these cases? Nominalists like William of Ockham have argued against this, suggesting universals are just labels for similar individuals and don't have a real nature of their own. Aquinas would argue, the common trait is the substance that makes each horse a horse. It's not a part you could separate like a hoof. It's the guiding principle that turns matter into a horse, giving it unique abilities and actions. This form is present in each horse as a reality, but it's through abstraction that we come to know it, since our intellect processes from concrete examples to universal concepts. Third, considering the idea of intelligible forms, if we can only know the form within our minds, not the actual thing, how can we be certain our thoughts match reality? This dilemma, which puzzled Descartes, led to doubts about whether our ideas accurately reflect the world around us. Think about the possibility that we're just brains in vats, experiencing fake sensations. How can we break free from our own mental ideas to see if they actually align with reality? Aquinas wouldn't entertain this notion. We don't perceive intelligible forms as objects themselves. We perceive reality through them, but they are not the things we are actually perceiving. These forms help our minds match up with reality. They aren't a layer between us and what's real. When I get the concept of a horse, I'm not staring at an idea in my brain. I'm understanding what real horses are out in the world. The forms let me comprehend this, but aren't what I'm actually understanding. Is this explanation good enough, though? It seems like it just claims direct realism is true, without showing how our thoughts give us straightforward access to the real world. Modern philosophy, especially since Descartes, has wrestled with this very issue. Descartes' focus on subjectivity, Kant's split between phenomena and noumena, and the pragmatist's reshaping of truth all come from frustration, with the idea that knowledge is just our minds aligning with reality. Then there's the complex setup of active and possible intellects, intelligible forms and sensory images, which seems complicated and more theoretical than observable. Can't we simplify how we talk about knowledge? Empiricists argue it's all just structured sensations. Rationalists believe knowledge springs from inherent principles, and Kant thinks it comes from the mind's categories overlaid on sensory experiences. Why should we cling to Aquinas' detailed system? Supporters of Aquinas say his ideas actually make sense of features of cognition that simpler theories miss. Total empiricism fails to explain universal and necessary knowledge. Pure rationalism doesn't show how knowledge ties to reality. And Kant's categories, which our minds impose, aren't found in the real world. Aquinas' philosophy accounts for the sensory sources of knowledge and its intellectual universality, recognizes both the mind's active role and its openness to reality, and explains individual traits and universal truths. To grasp how Aquinas links sense and intellect, let's look a bit deeper. He separates internal and external senses. The 5 external senses detect qualities of things, sight for colour and shape, hearing for sounds, and so forth. In addition to these, we have internal senses to process and organise this input. The common sense merges what the different external senses perceive into one coherent perception. For instance, I perceive an apple's colour, feel its texture, and smell its scent all together, not as 5 separate things. This integration into a single impression is the work of the common sense. The imagination holds on to sensory images even when the actual object isn't around, enabling us to think of absent things, recall past events, and plan ahead. Without it, our understanding would be stuck only on what's currently being sensed. The estimative power in animals or humans' cogitative power lets them judge sensory input swiftly, without lengthy reasoning. A sheep senses a wolf and immediately sees danger without lengthy thought. Similarly, we can recognize a friend without needing to piece together a conclusion about them. This ability intertwines sense with intellect, allowing for quick, practical understanding based on what we see and hear. Memory doesn't just keep visual images, but also ties them to time and context, giving us the foundation the intellect uses to draw universal truths and aiding in building our personal stories. These internal senses indicate Aquinas didn't see sensation as just passively absorbing information. It's about actively processing, organising, remembering, and judging. It builds a multi-layered world in which intellect can sift through using abstraction. Yet sensation itself, no matter how advanced, doesn't equal understanding. Grasping universals and making judgments needs the intellect. Aquinas differentiates 3 intellectual acts. Simple apprehension involves understanding essences without affirming or denying anything. So, when I get what a horse is, simple apprehension is what I'm doing. This stuff offers ideas, but it doesn't equal full-blown knowledge just yet. Judgment is what blends these concepts into statements, whether agreeing or disagreeing. When I say this creature is a horse, or that horses fall under mammals, I'm making assertions about reality, which can be either true or false. Judgment is the space where truth and lies actually make an entrance. Concepts alone don't have truth or falsehood, only judgments carry that weight. Reasoning takes what we already know and jumps to unknown conclusions through inference. So if I deduce that all mammals have warm blood and horses are mammals, I'm concluding that horses must be warm-blooded too, demonstrating fresh insights based on existing assumptions. This reflects how Aquinas describes science, revealing truths from basic principles. To Aquinas, truth is about the intellect matching up with reality. A judgment is considered true if what's stated actually exists, and false otherwise. This straightforward sounding theory stirs up some tough questions. What exactly does matching up mean? How do we figure out when our judgments align with reality? And why is one side of this match considered authoritative? Aquinas draws a line between truth in objects and truth in minds. Things are deemed true as they align with the divine mind that made them. A decent horse is a true horse, fully embodying its essence as intended by God's creative vision. Truth in this sense is about being what they ought to be. However, this ontological truth isn't the same thing as logical truth. Logical truth revolves around how judgment fits reality. When my mind understands what something is and assesses it accurately, my judgment is true. This kind of truth is rooted in how mind and object relate. The object is the benchmark for my judgment. If it aligns, then it's true. If not, it's false. But there's also a flip side where the mind can gauge the object. Artifacts ring true when they mirror the creator's vision. A house is considered true if it fits the architect's blueprint. Here the mind takes the lead, and the object needs to fit that mold. This shows that the interplay between mind and object is mutual. Natural things shape our understanding, but artifacts are created following the knowledge that brought them about. Aquinas sees these three truth kinds meeting in God. The divine mind sets the standard for all things, while also having perfect knowledge, creating a balance of cause and effect. In God alone, existence and understanding are one and the same, making God's knowledge inevitably true. On the other hand, our knowledge comes off as indirect and imperfect. Our minds adapt to things, not the other way around. That's why science leans on observation and testing, why we can mess up and need to fix mistakes with sharper evidence and logic. But this leads to wondering about skepticism. Just how sure can we be that our judgments really reflect reality? Aquinas is surprisingly upbeat. He believes we can have definite knowledge of quite a few things through our senses and deduction. If our senses work correctly, they pick up real qualities. The intellect derives real essences accurately from what we sense. Proper reasoning from the true premises delivers certain results. Still, Aquinas acknowledges limitations. Senses can be thrown off by odd situations. Abstraction might fail if based on poor or tricky examples. Reasoning can falter due to invalid steps or wrong premises. Plus, some elements are entirely beyond human comprehension. We can't grasp God's essence or fully understand non-material substances. Additionally, people vary in intellectual capacity. Some have sharper senses, better memories, more vivid imaginations, keener intellects. Education and experience enhance cognition. Sin and vice cloud judgment. Social and cultural influences shape what's believable. So while truth remains objective, our grasp of it is coloured by many factors. Current epistemology has drifted from Aquinas. Foundationalism, which holds that knowledge stands on unshakable grounds, is mostly dropped in favour of coherentism or reliabilism. The idea of correspondence truth is challenged by theories like deflationary, pragmatic, and pluralistic ones. We've moved away from the old idea that we get concepts from sensations to embrace different theories about how concepts form. The belief that thinking is separate from sensing has been tossed out, with folks now preferring the idea that these are connected cognitive processes. Still, some modern philosophers see merit in Aquinas' take on this. His moderate realism offers an alternative to the extremes of naive Platonism and extreme nominalism. He argues that knowledge should match up with an independent reality, pushing back against postmodern relativism. Aquinas recognized that there are various levels and kinds of knowledge, from perception to mathematics to metaphysics, which nicely fits the different ways we understand things. By combining empirical and rational elements, he avoided going too far into pure empiricism or pure rationalism. Analytical Thomists have tried translating Aquinas' ideas about knowledge into modern language. They think his view on abstraction could be seen as a way of explaining how we acquire concepts, rather than as some kind of mysterious mental process. His division between sensation and thinking lines up with the difference between perceiving and knowing something conceptually. His judgment theories foreshadow current ideas about opinions and truth. Some argue over whether these modern adaptations keep Aquinas' insights intact while dodging his pitfalls. Critics say that updating Aquinas just strips his theory down to basic ideas, that knowledge needs both experience and reasoning, both passivity and activity. Supporters, on the other hand, argue that the essential insights, like knowledge conforming to reality, the objectivity of truth, and the reality of universals, are still relevant no matter how they're framed. One big challenge to Aquinas' ideas comes from naturalism. If we believe the mind is just the brain, a physical thing shaped by evolution, then knowledge becomes simply about how our nerves process information due to evolutionary pressures. There's no non-physical mind abstracting concepts or understanding forms, just information processing useful in ancient environments. Aquinas might have said naturalism can't explain certain features of knowledge, like the fact truth has a normative aspect. Beliefs should align with reality, and mistakes are failures. There's also the necessity and universality of logic and math truths, our ability to understand abstract ideas without physical examples, and our capacity to spot errors and fix them through thinking them over. These suggest that knowing involves more than just physical processes, requiring an explanation beyond pure materialism. Whether Aquinas' argument holds up depends on bigger debates about naturalism and the nature of the mind. What is clear is that Aquinas tried to tackle how beings like us, who are material and sensory, could reach true understanding of ideas that are universal, necessary and non-material. Whether his specific tools and methods work or not, the problem he tackled is still significant. How does the human mind connect the dots from what it senses to intellectual ideas, from mere facts to necessary truths, from personal experiences to universal realities? Part 8. The human soul. What exactly are we? What defines a human being? It seems like a straightforward question, but getting a precise answer opens up a bunch of philosophical puzzles. Are we just our bodies? Or are we our minds? Or maybe we're some kind of mix of the two? If we're a bit of both, then how do such different things come together to make one person? Aquinas has a pretty unique and influential take on this. We're not just spirits accidentally stuck in bodies, nor are we some kind of software called consciousness running on a biological computer. Instead, we are embodied rational animals, single beings made up of matter and a rational soul. This kind of view tries to keep both our physical and spiritual sides intact, without reducing one to the other. For Aquinas, the soul isn't a separate entity living inside the body like a captain in a ship. It's not some kind of ethereal substance either. The soul is what organizes matter into a living person. It's what makes a body a living thing rather than just a potential living thing. Every living being has a soul in that sense. Plants have a soul that allows them to grow, take in nutrients and reproduce. Animals have souls that enable them to sense, move and feel emotions. Humans have rational souls that can do all of these things, plus think and make decisions. The soul isn't an extra part added to a finished body. It's what gives the body life and its particular abilities. This might sound odd to modern people. We often think of a soul as consciousness, personality, or some spiritual core. But for Aquinas, it's simply the life principle that separates living things from non-living ones. A corpse, chemically speaking, is the same as a living body, but it doesn't have the soul that organizes those chemicals into a functioning organism. In humans, the soul is special, because it can do things beyond what matter can. The intellect understands abstract concepts like justice, numbers and essences, while the will can make choices not dictated by material causes. These activities need powers that aren't completely tied to physical organs. Sensing needs sense organs and can't happen without them, but thinking doesn't need a physical organ and could theoretically happen without a body. This leads Aquinas to a surprising idea. The human soul can exist on its own. Unlike plant and animal souls, which disappear with the body, the human soul can go on without it. It's more than just a form. It has its own active existence that's independent of matter. When the body dies, the soul continues, albeit in an incomplete state. But this brings up major issues. If the soul is the form of the body, how can it exist without a body? Form and matter are typically linked. Matter is simply potential without form, and form without matter seems equally tricky. How can something that organizes exist without anything to organize? It feels contradictory. Aquinas argues that the human soul is unique because its highest functions go beyond matter. While its basic and animal-like functions need a body, its rational abilities don't. So the soul has a way of existing that isn't fully reliant on being in matter. It's both the form of the body and a substance that can stand alone. Though this seems paradoxical, it's vital for explaining what makes us human. Critics then and now find this answer lacking. Aristotelians like Averroes propose that if the intellect is immaterial, it must be a shared thing among all humans, not something individual. This means there's just one intellect that everyone taps into, and nothing personal survives the body's death. Aquinas disagrees strongly. Each person has an individual rational soul that is both the form of their body and a standalone entity, capable of outliving the body. The soul's uniqueness comes from its connection to the specific body it animates. My soul isn't like yours because it's tied to this body, not some other one. Even after we die, the soul holds onto its connection to the body it was once a part of, which makes the idea of bringing that same body back to life quite reasonable. However, Platonists and later Cartesian dualists have argued the opposite. If the soul can exist on its own and function at its best without the body's help, why should it be connected to a body at all? Why not say that humans are essentially souls using bodies just as temporary tools? This simpler view also better highlights the soul's independence and immortality. Yet Aquinas disagrees with this as well. Humans aren't just their souls. I'm not merely a soul using a body. Rather, I'm a blend of both soul and body, a single entity with both parts sharing the same existence. A soul without a body isn't a full human, just a part of one. That's why a separated soul waits for resurrection, to be whole with the body again and live as a complete human being. Aquinas' teaching on the unity of body and soul is one of his most crucial and challenging ideas. Going against Plato, he denies that we're essentially souls temporarily housed in bodies. Against materialism, he contests that we're not just bodies without anything beyond physical matter. We are a unified combination of body and soul, each needing the other for a complete human existence. The soul needs the body even though rational abilities can work without physical organs, they rely on the body for content. All human knowledge starts with sensations, which require sense organs. Even when the mind thinks about immaterial concepts, it uses images derived from sensory input. Without a body, a soul couldn't gain new knowledge through typical human learning, but could only reflect on what it already knows. Naturally, the body needs the soul too. Without it, the body isn't alive, organized or functioning, and just deteriorates into basic elements. The soul is vital for making the body truly human, rather than a mix of chemicals. But how do the soul and body interact? If the soul is non-physical and the body is physical, how do they affect each other? This is the mind-body problem that's puzzled thinkers since Descartes highlighted it. Sensations trigger thoughts. Seeing a fire makes me think about heat. Thoughts prompt actions. I decide to raise my arm and it moves. But how can non-physical thoughts influence the physical body? Aquinas would argue the problem is misrepresented. Soul and body aren't two complete separate entities that must interact. They are two essential parts of a single being. It's the human being that acts, not the soul or body in isolation. When I see and comprehend, it's not just the soul or body at work alone, but me, the whole being, engaging in activities involving both physical perception and non-physical thinking. Modern philosophy since Descartes has found this view unsatisfying, leading to a shift away from substance dualism towards materialism, property dualism, or other theories. Yet the core issue Aquinas addressed persists, reconciling the evident dependence of consciousness on brain states with the challenge of explaining conscious experience solely through physical processes. Advances in neuroscience have uncovered deep links between mental states and brain states. Damage to certain brain areas affects specific cognitive abilities. Drugs altering brain chemicals change consciousness. Brain scans display neural patterns linked to mental states. This seems to bolster materialism. The mind is simply a function of the brain. Yet the nature of consciousness, intentionality, and morality resists pure materialist explanations. The personal aspect of experience, the directedness of thoughts, the ethical dimensions of reasoning seem fundamentally different from simple brain activities. The hard problem of consciousness questions how brain processes lead to subjective experiences. No objective, third-person account of brain activity seems to fully explain the first-person perspective of consciousness. Aquinas wouldn't be shocked by the close ties between mental states and brain functions. He was firm on the idea that in our world, our mental ability relies on our physical organs, even if the intellect itself is something beyond the material. The brain plays a role in creating mental images, focusing attention, and maintaining memories. So when the brain gets harmed, our thinking ability takes a hit, not because our intellect is made of matter, but because the physical aspects that support it aren't working like they should. Yet the intellect itself can understand universal truths, spot logical reasoning, and think over its own processes, all of which go beyond mere physical happenings. The idea of justice isn't just brain cell activity, and the number 7 has nothing to do with brain states. Recognizing logical truths isn't something you can weigh or put on a map. These are things the mind can understand beyond physical stuff. Skeptics say concepts and numbers are just pulled from our physical world, and logic comes from manipulating symbols we can touch. But those who believe in the deeper nature argue that doesn't cover the idea of how we should think. Logic isn't about what we just do, it's about how we should think. Mathematical truths are unchangeable facts. Intentionality means meaning something, not just a chain of events. Aquinas didn't only see the soul as having intellect, but willpower too, the capability to choose based on deep thought. Unlike animals that just react to what they sense, we humans can think over choices, weigh options, favour long-term goals over immediate ones, and even ignore the obvious good for a greater one. This gives us true freedom, not just being unpredictable but controlling ourselves with reason. We can hold back from our immediate urges, figure out what's worth it, and set our sights on what we decide is important. This freedom comes from the mind understanding universal value. Since our mind can picture the perfect good, no temporary reward is ever enough or guides our choices absolutely. We can always question if something is really worth chasing, or if another choice would be smarter. But does this kind of freedom confirm an immaterial soul? Can't a fully physical system have a mind of its own when it's processing information and making decisions? In a way, AI makes decisions and chooses too. So what makes human freedom really unique? Aquinas would argue true freedom is about seeing true value, not just reacting to input through a set of programmed instructions. Computers operate through codes made by people. They don't wonder if their tasks are truly valuable, don't think about the purpose of what they do, and don't recognize moral duties. Human freedom is realizing an action should be done, not just deciding the best way to hit a predetermined mark. The fact that mind and intention exist beyond mere material supports who we are over a lifetime, because my soul isn't just how I'm put together, but an existing thing on its own. I stay the same person despite all the cells in my body changing. The child at 7 and the adult at 70 have no cells in common, yet they're the same person thanks to the same soul. However, modern ideas about what makes us us bring this into question. Some say our identity lies in the continuity of memory, traits and mind, without needing a soul. Others argue we're fundamentally biological beings, and our identity lies in our body's ongoing existence, not our mind's continuity. Neither view demands the existence of a soul. Aquinas would counter that both mental and physical continuity rely on the soul as their foundation. Memories stick because the soul keeps them. Bodies stay physically continuous because the soul keeps shaping them into living forms. Without the soul being what unifies, there's no reason why all different traits and actions come together as one ongoing entity. The most debated part of Aquinas' view of the mind is his belief in the soul's natural immortality. The soul, by its very nature, exists independently from the physical matter and can't just vanish without some outside force destroying it. Plus, since it's not made up of parts, it can't fall apart like material things can. This means the human soul doesn't naturally die. This immortality is a natural facet, not some supernatural addition, stemming from the soul's nature as an enduring essence. But this immortality isn't entirely complete. Once separated, the soul misses out on its usual operations that require a body, like getting new knowledge through the senses. It can think about what it already knows, but can't gather any new insights the way humans normally do. That's why resurrection becomes essential for our full human experience. However, there are critics with questions. First, if the soul is the form that gives life to the body and is tied to that specific physical matter, what distinguishes souls from each other once they're separated? They're no longer the forms of different bodies. Do they just blend into one universal mind, as Averroes suggested? Aquinas argues that even after separation, a soul maintains a connection to its body since it used to animate that specific matter and is designed to reunite with it. This connection gives each soul its individuality, but skeptics struggle with this idea. How can something that isn't around anymore create individuality for a subsisting soul? Second, there's the puzzle of a form existing without matter. This seems at odds with Aristotle's philosophy, where form and matter go hand in hand. Aquinas concedes that the human soul is a unique exception to the usual rules. It acts as a form but is more than just a form. Some critics think this exception is more about religious beliefs in immortality than logical philosophical reasoning. Third, modern science challenges the idea of a soul-based immortality. If our consciousness relies on the brain's functions, then a change in brain chemistry can alter personality, and consciousness is tied to the brain state. With brain death, consciousness stops. This implies there's no independent soul continuing on. The strong link between mind and brain supports materialist views that consciousness is brain-based and ends with the brain's death. Aquinas would argue that even though our cognition relies on the brain, our intellect isn't material. It could use physical organs without being limited to them. When those organs no longer function, the intellect might work in a different way. Critics counter that this is just theoretical, grounded more in religious belief than solid evidence or argument. Fourth, the notion of existing without a body is puzzling. A disembodied soul would lack physical presence. Without being positioned in space and time, how does it interact with the world? Without sensory organs, how does it perceive anything? Without a brain, how does it think? Separated souls seem like minds, floating in a material universe. Aquinas agrees that this kind of existence is unnatural and less than ideal. He doesn't claim to fully grasp how these souls operate. He firmly believes they continue on because they're inherently unable to be destroyed by the death of the body, accepting that this remains a bit of an enigma, with answers possibly revealed through divine insight. The core issue might be whether the idea of the soul as a form of the body makes sense at all. According to Aristotle, if form is the reality of matter, then how can form exist without it? If some forms can exist on their own, why call them forms instead of just acknowledging them as immaterial entities capable of shaping matter? This brings us back to the old debate of substance dualism, where soul and body are two distinct entities. Aquinas insists his perspective is different from dualism. He sees humans as a single entity, with one existence shared by both soul and body. not two separate substances joined together. But whether this stands up or ends up being similar to either dualism or materialism is an ongoing discussion. Today's philosophy of mind has mostly shifted away from substance dualism toward materialism, functionalism, or property dualism. Most philosophers today view the concept of an immaterial soul as outdated, a leftover from before scientific thinking took hold. But the hard problem of consciousness still puzzles us. The gap between what's happening in the brain and how we experience it can't be closed easily. Concepts like intentionality and normativity don't readily fit into a naturalistic framework. Some modern philosophers think that by revisiting Aquinas' hylomorphism, which they believe we've misunderstood, we might find a way to tackle these issues. This view suggests humans are single organisms with mental properties that arise from, but can't be reduced to, their physical makeup. It aims to balance insights from both materialist and dualist perspectives without getting caught up in their problems. There's debate over whether Aquinas' ideas back this modern use, given his belief in both an immaterial intellect and personal immortality, which might not mesh with naturalism. What's clear is his approach tries to both ground us in our physical reality and recognize our rational transcendence, posing questions about human nature that remain tricky for philosophers today. Part 9. Where Aquinas stumbles. Every philosophical framework has its flaws. Even the brightest minds slip up, base arguments on shaky grounds, overlook key objections, or are simply confined by the times they live in. Aquinas is no different. To truly grasp his ideas, we need to recognize where his arguments falter, where his assumptions get tricky, and where his conclusions raise eyebrows. This isn't about bashing him, but rather offering a genuine critique. Showing the utmost respect for a thinker involves engaging with their ideas deeply enough to critique them thoroughly. Some of the most powerful critiques of the 5 ways come from David Hume in his dialogues concerning natural religion, and Immanuel Kant in his critique of pure reason. Hume's arguments take aim at the heart of cosmological and teleological reasoning, while Kant's critique challenges the whole endeavour of proving God's existence through logic. Hume's fallacy of composition questions the idea that what's true for individual parts must be true for the whole. Aquinas contends that if everything within the universe needs an external cause, then the universe itself must also need one. However, Hume argues this doesn't necessarily add up. Just because every brick in a wall is small doesn't make the wall small too. Every part of a person could be under 6 feet, yet the person might be 6 feet tall. By the same token, each part of the universe could be contingent without proving the universe itself is contingent. Aquinas would counter that his focus isn't on aggregate properties, but on existence itself. If everything existing needs a cause, and the universe is just all those existing things put together, then what explains their existence instead of nothingness? But Hume's rebuttal is clear. Explaining every part might suffice without needing to explain the entire collection. Hume further questions if causation is as vital as Aquinas suggests. We note that events of type A often precede events of type B, but do we ever truly see causation itself, some inevitable link between cause and effect? Or are we merely seeing sequence and assuming causation due to habit? If causation is just consistent succession, without a necessary link, then the idea that every effect requires a cause becomes questionable. Aquinas would argue that causation isn't just observed sequence. It's a metaphysical principle we grasp through contemplation on the nature of change and existence. Understanding change from potential to actual reveals it needs something already actual. This isn't about generalizing from experience but analyzing concepts. Yet Hume would say that the problem lies in projecting our conceptual tendencies onto reality and assuming they are universal truths. Kant's critique goes even further. He claims existence isn't a real attribute. Saying God exists doesn't add something to God's concept. It only means the concept exists in reality. But concepts alone don't disclose whether they really exist. Existence has to be confirmed through experience, not purely through theoretical reasoning. This challenges all of Aquinas' 5 ways, which rely on reasoning from motion, causation, contingency, perfection, and order to conclude God's necessary existence. But if existence can't be deduced from concepts, no matter how sound the deductions, they can't confirm actual existence. They might suggest that if certain things are real, then God must be, but they don't confirm God's actual presence. Supporters of Aquinas argue that his reasoning is a posteriori, grounded in observed reality rather than a priori conceptual thinking. He starts with real-world experiences of motion, causation and contingency, and reasons toward their essential causes. It's about inferring cause from effects we can see, not deriving existence from abstract ideas. However, Kant would challenge whether arguments based on experience can extend beyond possible experience to confirm the reality of something like God. Natural law theory faces equally tough challenges, especially the is-ought problem. Aquinas figures out what's right and wrong by looking at human nature. We naturally want to stay alive, have kids, learn and be social. From these instincts, he says we should protect life, have kids responsibly, seek knowledge and live in peace. But just having an inclination doesn't automatically make doing it right. For example, rapists and thieves follow natural urges too, but that doesn't make rape or theft okay. So we need to figure out which inclinations are actually good ones to follow. Aquinas says reason helps us see which instincts complete who we are as humans. But how can reason work without some prior idea of what's good? It becomes a bit of a loop. We say inclinations are good if they seem right to us, but then claim what's right is based on these inclinations. If we already agree rape is bad, it's easy to call the urge to rape wrong. But if we didn't know that, how would we tell the difference between a wrong urge and a natural one? Aquinas' idea of everything having a purpose, like eyes for seeing or hearts for pumping blood, runs into trouble with modern biology. Biology shows that organs evolve because they help species survive and reproduce, not because there's a grand design. Eyes let creatures see, so those creatures live longer, but there's no specified cosmic purpose like seeing. Sexual organs let genes get passed down. It's not about a separate essence of sexuality apart from this process. Without the idea of a built-in purpose, Aquinas' natural law loses its grounding. If nature doesn't dictate purposes, morality becomes subjective, based on what we decide. Aquinas would argue that purposes are still real, even if they're products of evolution. Hearts still pump blood, that's objectively what they do. But some critics say calling this a function is adding purpose where there isn't any. A heart doesn't pump blood for a reason, it just does, and we benefit from that fact. The doctrine of double effect comes under fire too. The idea that intended versus foreseen outcomes are morally different doesn't feel right. If I do something knowing it will kill someone, how is there any less bad than intending to kill them? In both cases, I pick an action that ends in death. Does how I phrase my intention really change the moral weight? Think about World War II bombing strategies. Allied forces bombed cities, killing many civilians. They knew civilians would die but claimed the goal was to destroy military resources. The civilian deaths were foreseen, not intended. Does this make the bombings moral? Critics say it doesn't. Choosing an action that you know will kill thousands of innocent people means you're choosing to kill them, despite how you word your intentions. You're treating innocent lives as expendable, as just a means to win the war, which goes against the idea of never using people merely as tools. Defenders of the doctrine argue there's a real difference between wanting an outcome and accepting it as a byproduct. Intentions shape actions in meaningful moral ways. Someone who kills as part of their plan is a killer, in a way that someone who is sad about the deaths but accepts them as a side effect is not. But skeptics don't buy it. Both involve actions leading to death. The difference seems more like an excuse. The doctrine is ripe for misuse. A smart moral argument can twist just about any action to fit those 4 rules. I'm not trying to kill civilians. I'm just aiming to crush the enemy's spirit by taking out their cities, and civilian casualties just happen to be a side effect. Or, I'm not trying to end the fetus's life. I'm just planning to remove the uterus, with the fetus's demise simply anticipated. By cleverly rephrasing things, almost anything can be justified. Aquinas' metaphysical ideas also run into trouble with today's physics. The gap between potentiality and actuality assumes that change is fundamentally essential. But modern physics hints that the ultimate reality might not change at all. Like a four-dimensional block universe where past, present and future all exist simultaneously. Our perception of change might just be our experience of going through time, not something fundamental. If that's the case, potentiality and actuality are just mental constructs we impose on a steady reality, not genuine metaphysical truths. Quantum mechanics throws a wrench in Aquinas' idea that nothing can bring about its own potential. Quantum fluctuations seem to happen without a cause. Particles seem to appear out of nowhere without a prior existent entity to bring them about. Virtual particles are constantly blinking in and out within quantum fields. If quantum mechanics holds, Aquinas' cosmological argument hits a serious snag. Those defending Aquinas claim that quantum happenings take place in fields guided by physics laws, which themselves need an explanation. Yet this sounds like shifting the argument. If uncaused happenings can occur in quantum physics, it undermines the claim that everything must have a cause. The essence-existence concept, central to Aquinas' metaphysics, is challenged by many modern philosophers. Is there truly a divide between what something is and the fact that it is? Or is it just our way of thinking? When I grasp the essence of a horse, am I understanding something separate from the reality of its existence? Or am I just contemplating horses in theory without considering their realness? Some argue this divide is trivial, highlighting how we can define things without knowing if they exist. But that's more about language and thought than reality. Things don't inherently have two components, essence and existence. They simply exist, and we can describe their traits. Others say the distinction is meaningless. How can essence and existence be separate if they cannot be divided? If any essence that exists has its existence, and every existence belongs to some essence, then how are they really different? Aquinas explains they differ like potential and actual states, but this seems a bit like going in circles. We grasp potential and act through the essence-existence difference, so using them to clarify that difference doesn't quite work. Aquinas' psychology might be the weakest part of his philosophical framework. The idea of a subsistent form is confusing. If form is matter's reality, then form existing without matter sounds contradictory. Claiming the human soul is both a form of the body, yet subsists independently, seems contradictory. If it's a form, it shouldn't exist alone. If it's a substance, it's not a true form of the body. The setup involving active intellect shining on phantasms to generate intelligible concepts looks like complicated theorizing without factual backing. Modern cognitive science uses neural networks and statistical learning to explain how concepts form, skipping over spiritual or non-material explanations. Aquinas' complex metaphysical system isn't necessary when simpler scientific explanations suffice. His arguments supporting the soul's eternal life feel shaky. Even assuming intellect is somehow separate from physical organs, why believe it persists after death? Consciousness relies entirely on the brain. Brain injuries affect consciousness severely or end it. When the brain dies, all signs point to consciousness ending too. Thinking that an immaterial soul lives on after we die feels like hoping against hope, mostly due to religious beliefs rather than solid philosophy. Saying these souls keep their individuality is a tricky one. How does a soul that's tied to a specific body stay unique when that body's gone? Do all souls just merge into one? Aquinas claims they keep some connection to the bodies they were once part of, but this sounds pretty strange. How does a connection to something that's not there help differentiate unique entities? Aquinas' take on ethics can feel too rigid, leading to some out-there conclusions. His natural law sets firm bands that seem to overlook what's morally important. He says lying is wrong, even if it's to protect an innocent person from a killer. Contraception? Always wrong, regardless of disease or poverty. Suicide? Never okay, even for someone in unbearable pain. These absolute stances seem harsher than good moral thinking should be. His views on women show the outdated medieval biases we now see as truly wrong. He bought into Aristotle's idea that women are just flawed versions of men. Aquinas argued that women should play second fiddle to men in both marriage and society because he considered men more rational. He also barred women from the priesthood since, in his mind, only men could represent Christ. These weren't just minor slip-ups. They were woven into his whole philosophy, based on his understanding of nature and law. By today's standards, his support of religious enforcement sounds really disturbing. He thought it was fine to execute heretics who didn't backtrack after receiving some teaching in order to stop them from messing with others. He was okay with forcing pagan kids to convert. He even backed the idea of censoring and squashing views against Catholic doctrine. These ideas make sense based on his beliefs about truth, authority, and the greater good, but the outcome clashes with our sense of human rights and dignity. Even his just war theory, though it tries to limit conflict, doesn't raise the bar high enough. The idea of a just cause can be met with all sorts of sketchy reasons. Right intention can easily be twisted by self-deception. These principles don't really stop wars because every side believes they're justified. History shows us just war theory has often been used to back wars we now see as anything but just. Maybe the crux of the matter is Aquinas' whole project is based on ideas modern times have questioned, like the belief that reality can be fully understood and has a rational structure that makes sense to us, or that everything has an inherent purpose, not just meanings we impose. He also thought reason could find objective moral truth beyond social norms or personal tastes. Plus, he saw faith and reason as two sides of the same coin, with philosophy proving religious truths. These ideas, however, aren't set in stone. Post-Kantian thought wonders if we really know things as they are, or just how they appear to us through our own lenses. Evolutionary biology suggests what's been seen as purpose might just be the result of natural selection. In ethics, there's a growing acceptance of differing views that make the idea of universal moral truths a tough sell. Secular views push for a clear line between faith and philosophical reasoning. If these basic ideas don't hold up, Aquinas' whole framework falls apart. Without real purpose, natural law loses its base. Without trust in reason's grip on reality, the five ways show nothing. Without objective moral truths, his virtue ethics is just another choice out there. Without the harmony of faith and reason, his whole system falls into chaos. Yet we shouldn't go overboard with this. Critiques aren't outright disses. Just because Aquinas' thinking goes against the grain today doesn't mean he's wrong and we're right. Maybe modern thought is off track. Maybe dismissing teleology was a wrong turn. Maybe doubting reason's capacity is a trap itself. Moral relativism might not really make sense. When listing objections, the aim isn't to write off Aquinas, but to grasp his ideas better, spotting the assumptions in debate, the weak spots in arguments, and where conclusions could use some tweaking. Sincere critics recognize the strength of his thinking, but also point out its boundaries. True supporters admit to issues but argue these can be fixed, or that his overall system is still valuable despite them. What makes Aquinas stand out isn't solving all philosophical dilemmas once and for all. No philosopher has. He's significant because of his ambitious scope, his methodical approach, his deep insights, and the ongoing importance of the questions he tackled. Even when we think he missed the mark, we learn a lot by figuring out why and how. And even if we disagree with his conclusions, diving deep into his arguments often proves beneficial. Part 10. The Living Debate. Even 750 years after Thomas Aquinas passed away, his ideas are still buzzing in today's philosophical circles. That's quite something. Most thinkers from the medieval age, they tend to be subjects for history buffs, offering insights about the old days without much impact on modern day discussions. But Aquinas is a different story. His work still sparks heated debates, encourages fresh takes, and influences chats about metaphysics, ethics, and religious philosophy right now. So, why does Aquinas stand out while others fade away? A few reasons come to mind. For starters, his work covers just about every big philosophical question out there. He delved into questions like what it means to exist, if knowledge is something we can truly grasp, the backbone of ethics, if God is real, what laws should look like, and how virtues work. This massive scope means there's something in his writings for every philosopher to chew on. Then there's his methodology. Whether or not you agree with what he concluded, his reasoning is beyond meticulous. Aquinas was all about getting terms right, distinguishing between different meanings, considering objections from every angle, and building up his arguments step by step. This kind of logical rigour is useful even for those who don't buy into his metaphysical or theological views. Thinking like Aquinas is practically a masterclass in philosophical reasoning. Moreover, Aquinas' way of blending reason with faith was ahead of its time. As philosophy and theology started to drift apart, issues cropped up that he'd already grappled with. How should science and faith coexist? Is morality without a divine anchor possible? How should secular and religious powers interact? These are still pressing inquiries, and even if Aquinas didn't solve them all, his thoughts on the matter offer a solid foundation to build upon. Philosophical tastes have also swung back to some of his key ideas. In the last century, virtue ethics made a comeback after a long run of other moral theories. Philosophers turned again to Aristotle's essentialism over more modern takes like nominalism. Folks are now revisiting natural law theory, whether they're religious or not, and in the realm of philosophy of mind, debates on intentionality and consciousness echo questions Aquinas tackled. Revisiting his work has turned out to be a wise move here too. Today's Thomism isn't a single monolithic doctrine. You've got traditional Thomists, who largely stick to Aquinas' original framework. These thinkers, often found in Catholic academia, uphold his views on metaphysics, knowledge, ethics, and his proofs for God's existence, pitching it as an alternative to modern philosophy. On the flip side, transcendental Thomists, drawing from thinkers like Joseph Marischal, Karl Rahner, and Bernard Lonergan, tried splicing Thomism with Kantian ideas. They acknowledged our minds actively shape what we know, rather than just absorbing forms. They spotlighted our curiosity-driven push toward infinite truths and God as a culminating point. They reframed Aquinas' metaphysical views through lenses of consciousness and subjectivity. Though this blend had mixed results, this approach eventually lost steam. Older Thomists critiqued it for steering away from Aquinas' objectivity. Analytical philosophers found the approach a bit too abstract. Aligning Aquinas with Kant showed to be a tricky, maybe even unfeasible undertaking since they stood on fundamentally different premises. Aquinas believes in our ability to know the world directly, while Kant claims we only grasp appearances shaped by our perceptions. Recently, analytical Thomism has gained traction. Starting in the 70s and 80s, philosophers with a background in analytical philosophy took a closer look at Aquinas' work. Thinkers like Peter Geach, G.E.M., Anscombe, Anthony Kenny, later joined by John Haldane, Eleanor Stump and Brian Davies, applied analytical philosophy's sharp tools and strict standards to Aquinas' texts. What sets analytical Thomism apart? First, it's the method. They employ formal logic, persistent conceptual analysis, and focus on arguments over authority. Analytical Thomists don't hesitate to dismiss Aquinas' views when his reasoning doesn't hold up. They treat his writings as philosophical suggestions to be critically assessed, not as flawless. Next is their interaction with modern philosophy. Analytical Thomists actively join in mainstream philosophical conversations. They publish in leading journals, head to major conferences, and engage in debates with philosophers outside the Thomistic tradition. They don't limit themselves to Catholic settings or Thomistic groups, making Aquinas relevant even to those who would typically steer clear of the Summa Theologica. Then there's their selective approach. Analytical Thomists aren't interested in defending all aspects of Aquinas' philosophy. They take what they find philosophically valuable and leave behind what they consider untenable. For example, some might dismiss his arguments for God's existence, but stand by his virtue ethics, while others might support his metaphysics, but not his natural law theory. They treat Aquinas more like a philosophical treasure trove than a strict system to accept fully. However, this can lead to internal conflicts. Once you strip away his theological influences, medieval philosophical views, and outdated science, what's left of Aquinas? Critics argue that analytical Thomism is merely Thomism in name, keeping the Thomistic lingo but losing the core substance. Supporters counter that they're reviving Aquinas' philosophical essence from the constraints of his historical backdrop. Debates in and around Thomism today highlight its vigour. For instance, the argument over the distinction between essence and existence. Is it real or just conceptual? If real, what defines it? And how does this distinction connect to that of substance and accidents? Different Thomists offer diverse answers, drawing from different Aquinas texts and presenting varied metaphysical analyses. The debate on universals also endures. Moderate realism suggests that universals exist within things, not as separate Platonic forms but as common natures genuinely found in individuals. Yet what defines a common nature? How does it exist in individuals without losing its universality? If it does become unique, how is it still common? Solutions vary. Some spotlight the intellect's role in abstracting universals, others highlight causal powers rooted in common natures, and some create formal ontologies to specify universals' mode of being. Aquinas' connection between theology and philosophy is also up for debate. Did he separate them genuinely, granting philosophy its autonomy? Or was his philosophy always intended to serve theology, influenced by Christian beliefs? Can non-believers explore Thomistic philosophy without engaging with theology? Or is it so intertwined that removing the theology distorts the whole system? Conservative Thomists maintain that faith and reason are unified in Aquinas. His philosophy can't be adequately grasped without his theology, as his arguments lean on Christian metaphysics, even when not directly invoking revelation. On the flip side, liberal Thomists argue that his philosophical arguments are standalone. The 5 ways, for instance, don't need faith for comprehension or critique. Natural law theory can develop independently of theological premises. This reflects varying interpretations of his texts. Lastly, there's the philosophical puzzle of the unity of intellect, which pitted Aquinas against Averroes. Is intellect unique to each individual or universal? Current cognitive science shows much of cognition is linked to individual brain activities, but the essence of thought appears universal. When we both recognize that 2 + 2 = 4, are we engaging with the same truth or individual truths? Aquinas suggests it's one truth, 2 separate acts of comprehension. But how is this metaphysically feasible? Present-day virtue ethics frequently references Aquinas but with substantial changes. Thinkers such as Philippa Foot, Alasdair MacIntyre, and Rosalind Hursthouse have advanced virtue ethics without Thomistic metaphysics. They champion virtue without adhering to natural law, fixed human nature, or Aquinas' idea of teleology, focusing instead on practical wisdom and character without delving into souls and essences. Can virtue ethics thrive without relying on Thomistic roots? Some say sure, we can figure out virtues by thinking about what helps humans thrive, without getting into deep questions about the essence or purpose of things. Others aren't so sure, arguing that without some objective idea of what it means to be human, the concept of virtue might become too subjective and lose its guiding power. This debate is ongoing, with Thomistic virtue, ethics as one side of it. Natural law still plays a big role in legal and bioethical discussions. Modern thinkers like John Finnis, Germain Grisez, and Robert George have put a new spin on Aquinas' ideas. They focus on basic goods, fundamental values that motivate our actions: life, knowledge, friendship, practical wisdom, aesthetic pleasure, and religion. These basics offer a foundation for moral rules without needing biological purposes or Thomistic metaphysics. This new natural law approach aims to dodge the is-ought dilemma while keeping morality objective. It claims we recognize these basic goods purely through practical reasoning, not by observing nature. Moral guidelines stem from the need to respect these goods in all our actions, avoiding actions that directly undermine any of them. But critics wonder if this really sidesteps the is-ought problem, whether the list of basic goods is random, or whether strict moral rules can be defended. The hottest debates today involve Aquinas' religious philosophy. Do the 5 ways hold up? Can they be reshaped to dodge modern criticisms, or should they be seen as outdated relics? Supporters like Edward Feser believe the 5 ways, when properly understood, are still compelling. He argues critics misinterpret them by applying modern views to medieval ideas. These arguments are about metaphysics, not empirical claims. They aim to establish God as the essential basis of existence, not just an explanation for the world phenomena. However, skeptics aren't convinced. These arguments rely on debated metaphysical ideas. Infinite regress doesn't work, causation is real, and actuality trumps potentiality. Even if those metaphysical points are granted, at most they point to a necessary being, not the God of classical religion. More arguments would be necessary to show this being has attributes like omnipotence, omniscience, perfect goodness, and a personal nature, and those arguments have their own challenges. The problem of evil continues to be a tough obstacle for Thomistic natural theology. If God is all-powerful and perfectly good, why does evil exist? Aquinas' answer: that evil is just the absence of good, that God allows evil for greater purposes, and that free will needs the possibility of sin, seems insufficient when faced with the reality of terrible evils like childhood cancer, natural disasters, and genocide. Today's philosophers of religion argue about whether any explanation can truly succeed, and whether faith in God can be rational in light of such evil. Applied ethics has received notable contributions from Thomistic thought. Catholic bioethics heavily relies on natural law and the doctrine of double effect when discussing issues like abortion, euthanasia, reproductive technologies, and end-of-life care. The effectiveness of these approaches, or whether they just enforce strict rules overlooking individual cases, is a topic of heated debate. Thomistic ideas on just war guide discussions on humanitarian intervention, terrorism, nuclear weapons, and drone strikes. The utility of this guidance, or whether it simply justifies violence, is also debated. Political science circles have renewed interest in Thomistic ideas like the common good, subsidiarity, natural rights, and government limits, facing off with libertarians, who value personal freedom above societal obligations, and communitarians who prioritize community goals over individual needs. Thomists present a middle ground. People are naturally social, but societal well-being is about supporting individual thriving, not collective goals that overshadow the personal. Whether this middle path is sustainable or leans toward one extreme or the other is debated. Does focusing on the common good mean limiting personal freedoms? Does prioritizing personal rights weaken community bonds? What's the best way to balance rival goods when they clash? These issues highlight that Thomistic political thought, far from being a settled framework, continues to spur debate. Perhaps the most exciting question today is whether Aquinas' ideas can constructively interact with philosophies from outside the Western tradition. Christian missionaries spread Thomism to Asia, Africa, and Latin America, often presenting it as a European overlay forced onto local cultures. Is it possible for Thomistic concepts to shed light on Confucian ethics? Can natural law theory have a dialogue with Buddhist metaphysics? Can Aquinas' reasoning about God find common ground with Hindu theology? Some folks think so. The big questions about existence, knowledge, morality, and God go beyond specific cultures. Thomistic views, while shaped by their cultural context, tackle universal human issues. Others disagree, seeing Thomistic thought as deeply Western, influenced heavily by Greek philosophy and Christian teachings. Applying it to other traditions might seem like philosophical imperialism. The reality probably lies somewhere in the middle. Real dialogue can happen, but it needs humility, an eagerness to learn, and an understanding that Thomism doesn't corner the market on wisdom. Looking ahead, what lies in store for Thomism? 3 paths seem possible. Firstly, a continued decline. As the world becomes more secular, philosophy veers toward naturalism, and Catholic institutions lose their sway. Thomism might just become a relic of history. Yet this seems doubtful, considering the fresh energy in analytical Thomism and the lasting interest in virtue ethics and natural law. Secondly, it might persist as a minority viewpoint, staying alive among conservative Catholics and philosophers who appreciate it, evolving as it engages with modern thought, even as it remains on the fringe of mainstream philosophy. This seems most plausible. Thomism won't take over or vanish, but will survive as one of many philosophical choices, influential here and there but overlooked in other circles. Lastly, there might be a surprise comeback. Philosophical trends shift unexpectedly. Perhaps discontent with naturalism's failure to illuminate consciousness, intention, and morality will push philosophers back to Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics. Maybe the fatigue with post-Kantian philosophy will lead to a revival of pre-modern realism, or perhaps social and ethical turmoil will make natural law and virtue ethics more appealing. It's unlikely, but not out of the question. What's definite is that people will keep talking about Aquinas. Every generation has to revisit his work, figure out what to keep and what to discard. This isn't just about clinging to the past, it's a philosophical necessity. The issues he tackled are timeless. His arguments are some of the most sophisticated offered in philosophy. His system is a pinnacle of intellectual achievement. Even detractors of Thomism gain from engaging with it. Aquinas helps clarify alternatives. Critiquing his ideas hones philosophical skills. Embracing his insights enriches modern thought. Whether viewed as an opponent or ally, a historical figure or a modern-day voice, Thomas Aquinas is key for those delving into profound questions about reality, knowledge, ethics, and God. The final judgment should be fair. Aquinas didn't fulfill everything he aimed for. A full blend of faith and reason, an unassailable proof of God, an absolute basis for ethics, a thorough understanding of reality. No philosopher completely succeeds in such grand pursuits, yet his attempts contributed lasting value to philosophy. Rigorous debate methods, refined metaphysical distinctions, intricate ethical frameworks, and deep insights into human nature. We can't just adopt Thomism as is. Much has evolved. Our science is different. Our philosophy has shifted, our society has changed. But Aquinas teaches us how to think philosophically, methodically, carefully, systematically, with a readiness to pursue truth wherever it leads. We can take from his insights while leaving behind his mistakes. We can admire his achievements while progressing beyond them. Philosophy advances not by disregarding the past, but by critically engaging with it. Aquinas built on Aristotle, Augustine, Avicenna's work, correcting what he saw as their errors. We engage with Aquinas in the same spirit. The conversation stretches across ages, each generation adding its perspective, none holding the definitive answer. This is the essence of philosophy, ancient wisdom merging with modern inquiries, reason questing for truth, minds probing the mysteries of existence. In that continuous dialogue, Thomas Aquinas stands as a crucial figure, even after 750 years, still provoking thought, teaching us and demonstrating the incredible heights philosophy can reach.